Thank you very much for being here. I'll call to order the Lakewood City Council study session as on Monday, April 13th, 2026. We have items for discussion, and the first item for discussion this evening is our 2026 state legislative session update. Ms. Shelley Helder of Gordon Thomas Honeywell Government Affairs is here to speak to us. I believe she's got a presentation to make, so we appreciate you being here, Shelley.
Is it supposed to light up? Oh, I'm good. Okay. Oh, there it is, the red light. Okay. Good evening. I am Shelley Helder, and I have the privilege of serving as the city's contract lobbyist in Olympia. And I'm here this evening to provide a report on outcomes of the 2026 state legislative session. Before I jump, can't hear me. Bring it closer. Is that better? Can you hear me now? How about now? Okay, I just need to speak closer to the mic. Thank you. Before I get started on tonight's presentation, I do want to call your attention to a series of documents that are in your council packet and just kind of explain briefly what those are. First, there is a written report that's going to go into more detail than I'll be able to cover this evening. So that's outcomes on issues that the city has specific interest in. There is a summary of the supplemental budgets and all the list of the bills that the city took positions on this year. There's also some attachments to that report. There's a matrix document that the Association of Washington Cities develops that I think is a really helpful reference for what the budgets include or don't include. And then a comprehensive list of all the bills the legislature passed that impact cities. Not all of these bills will impact Lakewood, but it's intended to be, again, a resource for you all to know what happened this session. So this evening, there are 4 sections to my presentation. I'm going to start by providing an overview of the 2026 legislative session. I'll review outcomes from the city's legislative priorities, provide a brief overview of some additional issues that we worked on, and then wrap up by talking about next steps. So the 2026 legislative session was 60 days. It was the second year of the biennium. And in this, same as the first year of the biennium, the Democrats had majority control of both chambers. And with that came their ability to set the priorities for the session. Some of the major themes that we saw emerge throughout the session, which were a reflection of the Democrat priorities, were responding to federal actions, both at a policy level and a budget level, an intent or an objective to improve affordability for Washingtonians, and an effort to reform the state's tax code. In the short session, the primary objective is to update the state's biennial budgets, and they do so by adopting supplemental budgets. Normally, those are intended to make small changes to the 2-year budget. And then in addition to budget work, the legislature considered over 1,000 bills and ultimately passed 268. So as I mentioned, there were 3 supplemental budgets adopted. The most challenging of the 3 budgets this year was the operating budget, and that was largely due to rising maintenance level costs, driven by an increase in caseloads from new programs or program expansions. The supplemental operating budget increased spending by $2.4 billion. Roughly, or I guess exactly, 880 million of that $2.4 billion is from the state's budget stabilization account. It's also referred to as the rainy day fund. That's essentially the state's rainy savings account. The operating budget also relies on a transfer of $375 million from the Public Works Assistance account. And that is backfilled through bond funding from the capital budget. The largest expenditure in the supplemental operating budget is $1 billion to cover the state's self-insurance liability premium, and I'll touch on that more in a moment. The other two budgets, the transportation and the capital budgets, are traditionally developed in a bipartisan fashion, and that was the case this year. The supplemental transportation budget adds $1.2 billion in spending, and really the focus for the supplemental budget is maintenance and preservation of the state's highway system, and that includes the ferries system. The supplemental capital budget authorized an additional $889 million in spending. And one of the most notable investments from the supplemental capital budget is an additional $123 million for the Housing Trust Fund. So Lakewood has a practice of developing a legislative agenda that aligns with the state's two-year budget cycle. So council adopts an agenda at the beginning of the biennium, and then we make adjustments based on what's accomplished in the first year of the biennium, as well as input from legislators on what makes sense to continue to push for. So as a reminder, in 2025, the city requested and received $350,000 for Edgewater Park improvements. So that item was removed from the legislative agenda, and then new items were added. So one of the city's long-term priorities is the continued funding of the Community Partnership Program at Western State Hospital. And we advocate for this funding every 2 years. And in 2025, we were successful in receiving a small bump to account for inflation and help fund that program. In 2026, we partnered with the City of Medical Lake, home to Eastern State Hospital, to ask the legislature to codify the program. Senator Jeff Holy, who's from Spokane, represents Medical Lake, sponsored Senate Bill 5286 in the 2025 session, and it was automatically reintroduced in 2026. Again, this year, it passed the Senate unanimously. It was referred to the House Community Safety Committee, where the mayor testified along with the mayor of Medical Lake. It passed that committee unanimously. It was referred to the House Appropriations Committee, where it promptly died, the same place it died last year. I spoke to the chair of the House Appropriations Committee, Representative Tim Ormsby, also from Spokane, and he was very familiar with the bill, understood the intent, understood that it would not have a fiscal impact on the state's budget this year, and was still resistant to scheduling it for a hearing. His response to me was, the money is in the budget every year. We don't need to put it in statute. And that's a philosophical position that he holds. And we've been aware of that for many years, which is why we haven't been successful. He's been in his role for many years. Notably, a couple weeks ago, he announced that he is not running for re-election, so he will be retiring, and we will see a new chair of the House Appropriations Committee in 2027. I think who that ends up being, which we won't find out until late November, perhaps early December, will influence our likelihood of success in codifying this moving forward. The next priority was a $200,000 capital budget request for the preservation of the H-Barn silos. And Senator Tawana Nobles was quick to support this priority and to submit the capital budget request in the Senate. Representative Levitt also submitted the request on the city's behalf, and I'm pleased to report that the final capital budget includes the full amount of funding for the H-Barn silos preservation. And I want to emphasize that this outcome isn't possible without your 28th district legislators prioritizing this for the city. The next topic is public defense funding, and this is still one of the most unresolved pressures for local governments. There were two bills, well, I guess there were several bills, but two notable bills introduced this session that attempted to reduce the pressure on local governments. The first was House Bill 2163 and its companion Senate Bill 5913. They would have clarified that the court's 10-year phase-in takes precedence over the 3-year timeline that's been proposed by the State Bar Association. That bill did not get a public hearing. The second was Senate Bill 5914, and that would have restructured how the Office of Public Defense distributes state funding by moving to a pro rata formula as opposed to a competitive process. And that bill also did not receive a public hearing. We did, in the last couple of days of session, see an emergence of House Bill 1592. That was originally introduced in the 2025 session, didn't really make any progress all year. And then the final days of session had a public hearing, was amended to include cities, and then ultimately did not pass out of the House. So in short, there was discussion of the importance of funding for public defense, and there was some discussion around the policy, but there was no change to status quo. There is an ongoing lawsuit that has been filed by the Association of Counties that's currently in Thurston County Superior Court, but is not likely to be resolved before the next legislative session. And then the last item on the city's legislative agenda was a request for the state to provide funding for cities to implement the parking standards.
Excuse
Bill.
me, Ms. Helder.
Yes.
Councilmember Branstetter has a question. Mike?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Ms. Helder, I just wanted to clarify your comment about the Association of Counties lawsuit around this, and you said it won't get resolved before the next legislative session. Does that mean before the next legislative session begins, or before the next legislation section runs its course and concludes?
That's a great question. And it's all a little bit of conjecture at this point, but my hypothesis is it will not be resolved at least until 2028. And so definitely not before or after the 2027 session.
But maybe perhaps in that biennium.
Perhaps. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
So the final request was for the state to provide funding for cities to implement the parking standards bill that passed the legislature in 2025. This was by far the most difficult priority to advance, both because of the state's budget challenges and because the legislators that passed this policy did so intentionally in 2025 and did so without funding. So as frustrating as it is to have a state policy mandated without the funding that accompanies it for implementation, the makeup of the current legislature and in my estimation, likely the makeup of the 2027 legislature is not likely to move on this issue. So in addition to the city's top priorities, there are several other important topics that came up this session that we engaged in accordance with the city's policy manual. The legislature continued to focus on the regulation and siting of STEP housing, which is shelters, transitional housing, emergency housing, and permanent supportive housing. In 2021, the legislature passed House Bill 1220, and that required cities to allow these housing types in areas where hotels are permitted and to adopt reasonable occupancy, spacing, and health and safety regulations. However, local regulations around the state have varied widely and in some cases have been drafted so narrowly that it's essentially prevented shelters from being sited. So to address this, the legislature passed House Bill 2266 this session. The bill requires cities to allow permanent supportive housing and transitional housing in all residential zones and require shelters and emergency housing in all zones where hotels are allowed. It also narrows the types of spacing, occupancy, and health and safety regulations that cities can adopt. I will say the bill was heavily negotiated, and cities fingerprints are kind of all over this bill, primarily to allow for effective implementation. I think notably, when the bill hit the Senate floor, we reached out to our senators, and Senator Nobles was quick to respond to say, what can we do? And she ended up sponsoring an amendment that provided clarification on the types of development regulations that can still be applied to STEP housing types. Obviously, it's not changing the substantive policy of the bill, but it is still allowing the city to maintain development regulations for STEP housing that was ambiguous prior to that amendment. In addition, the legislature passed Senate Bill 6026, which authorizes residential development in commercial zones and also limits the use of ground floor retail requirements. This was a high priority piece of legislation for the governor and the lieutenant governor. And the premise of this bill, I think, was similar to the premise of the parking bill from the 2025 session, which is both parking and ground floor retail increase the cost of constructing housing. And so by removing that requirement, you reduce the cost of housing and you will, in all likelihood, see more housing constructed. So after several rounds of negotiations with cities, a final version of the bill was agreed upon. It still limits local authority, but there is some flexibility in how cities can still require ground floor retail in certain situations. Two notable situations are in transit station areas and in tax increment financing areas. Those are protected. And then I'll just mention as well, the bill only applies to cities with a population of 30,000 or above. So smaller cities are not subject to this. There were several issues that came up on the topic of city finance, and I'm going to summarize the outcomes on the most important ones. I mentioned earlier that the state's largest expenditure in the operating budget is liability insurance as a result of increasing tort claims and settlements. And this is a pattern that's occurring at every level of government. And the legislature attempted to address this with very little success this session. But the operating budget does include some funding for an interim work group to develop recommendations for the 2027 legislature to consider. So there were no substantive policy changes this year, but there is supposed to be work being done over the interim to come forward with recommendations. And then arguably the most notable piece of legislation that passed in the 2025 session was Senate Bill 6346, which establishes a tax on incomes above $1 million and eliminates sales tax on select products. That elimination of sales tax has the effect of reducing local sales tax revenue. And the legislature acknowledged this. The intent section of the bill states that very clearly. In the 4-year budget outlook, there's $200 million that's been allocated for local government fiscal health to essentially offset the impacts from the reduction in sales tax for counties, cities, and transit agencies. It's in the 4-year outlook because the millionaire's tax bill has a delayed effective date. It doesn't go into effect until January 1 of 2028. And so there is time to kind of figure out, is that the right amount, and how is that amount distributed amongst those 3 local governments? And then lastly, in spite of a challenging budget year, the state retained nearly all of state shared revenues. The only one that did receive a little bit of a haircut was cannabis revenue, which does not impact Lakewood. On the topic of public safety, the legislature passed Senate Bill 6002, which establishes the allowable uses of automated license plate readers. The bill allows law enforcement agencies to use ALPR cameras to investigate felonies and gross misdemeanors. For the entirety of session, gross misdemeanors were not allowed, and at the very end, we were successful in getting that included. And it sets a retention limit of 21 days. It was initially much shorter, which would have made it very difficult to use the information in an effective way. Um, and then I often focus these presentations on what passed during the legislative session, but I do want to highlight that the legislature considered for the third year in a row legislation that would have limited local government's ability to regulate public spaces. This year it was House Bill 2489. And that was strongly opposed by cities and ultimately it passed the policy committee, but didn't make it any further in the process. So now that session is over, a logical question is what do we do now? What comes next? I think the first and most important thing that the city can do is thank your state legislators. I mentioned it earlier, but the city would not be successful in securing capital budget awards year after year after year if not for the city's legislators making it a priority. And I mean, this could be through a formal event like a ribbon cutting or a groundbreaking, or inviting them to speak at a council meeting, but it's also informal at community event, going out of your way to say thank you to them. The next step is to implement the policies and the projects that received funding. There are so many bills that the legislature passed. Many of them will require the city's implementation. And so city staff will be responsible for that. I highlight that not because you necessarily play a role in that, but just for your awareness. And then I can't emphasize how critical it is to have timely delivery of the projects that the state has allocated funding to. It demonstrates that the city is a good steward of capital budget dollars, and it improves the likelihood that the city will continue to receive funding. Lakewood's been has an excellent track record of that, and so just encouragement to keep that kind of on your forefront of your mind. And then during the interim months, this is the time that we start planning for 2027. And as you as a city are working through what some of your biggest challenges are, I would say it's important to consider what can the state do to partner with you to address those challenges, and then start educating our state legislators about what those needs are. Often we don't identify the priorities and do that outreach until right before session begins, and there's good reason for that. There are a lot of things up in the air, especially because it's an election year. But I guess I want to also say, like, let's start thinking about what some of those partnership opportunities could be and get those on their radar sooner rather than later if we have identified them in advance. I mentioned it's an election year. The entire House and half the Senate will be up for re-election in November. And I just think it's worth noting that Senator Steve Conway has announced that he will not be running for re-election after serving 33 years in the legislature. So Lakewood will have a new senator representing the city come 2027. And the next session starts on January 11th. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Helder. Are there any questions? Questions at all, Mike? Are you ready to go, Phil? Because you've already got.
Thank you. That's incredibly helpful. You mentioned how this year's biggest fight was a millionaire's tax. If you had a crystal ball, what is next year's biggest fight?
Oh man, that is a really good question. I think I have to think about that and get back to you. I think depending on what happens with the millionaires, I mean, there's a couple lawsuits that have already been filed. We may or may not know the outcome of whether the millionaires tax will be upheld by 2027. If it's turned down either by the courts or by the people, then the state's going to have to figure out a different revenue stream. So I think that will be top of mind for everyone. If that's still not yet resolved, or if it's upheld, then I'm not sure. I'm gonna think about that. It's a good question.
Yeah, Ms. Helder, on your next step slide, And the first item that is there is to express gratitude. And we have done that consistently over the years. And in most legislative sessions, it's not that we got everything we were hoping for, but we usually got a substantial piece of what we were, which is not the case this year. In other words, so in express gratitude, how do you also express disappointment? And how is that likely to be perceived? And then when I say disappointment in terms of things like the range of changes into the license plate cameras, nothing to do, no progress on public defense, things like that. I think that it's important to really know, we know how the legislature as a whole dealt or didn't deal with those things, but how did our 6 legislators, were they, were they more supportive of what the city wanted, but just weren't in the majority, or how that would go? I think that's it's a problem when we have the legislature that is repeatedly asking us to do things that we do because they passed it into laws and they have given us things to implement, even if maybe collectively in the community, they're viewed as negative. Okay, so it becomes hard to focus solely on gratitude. And I guess not necessarily tonight, but before we get around to doing this, a little ways of how to tactfully also express some disappointment.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, I think that the disappointment doesn't discount the gratitude. And so I think you identified it well. Like, yes, we are very grateful for our legislators' support of the city's capital budget requests. And we want to figure out how to work better to accomplish some of these other priorities that are really pressing, that are really, I think, chronic concerns for the city's budget as opposed to acute, one-time project costs. So I think it's a discussion worth continuing to have.
Any other questions? Ms. Helder, a couple of things. Number one, thank you for bringing up Senator Conway's retirement. He, when the 29th had more about, at one point in time, the 29th was about half the city of Lakewood. And he was very good to us. He really was instrumental in helping us get funding for several projects at, I think it might even go be Ward's Lake, but mainly it was Springbrook Park, and very important. And we always got a warm reception down there. So we will miss him. On the global issue of indigent defense, which is going to be a real problem. It just is. We cannot, I mean, we took the vote last week on the 1/10 of 1%. We passed it, and it feels a little bit like, taking a bucket of water out of the ocean, right? I mean, it's inexorable. Lawyers telling us that we have to hire more lawyers, and then of course everyone sees you coming, so they charge you more, right? I mean, it's a little bit silly, really, if it wasn't so serious. Do we use AWC as our vehicle? Are we as a city, do you think our city's stance on this is in line with AWC's? So we use AWC's and WASAC's strategy here, or are we not in line with that? In general, we are. We'd like more state funding, but do you feel like we're in line with AWC, that if we just lined up behind AWC when we go, I mean, we've got the AWC conference in June. I imagine that'll be a fairly hot topic. Is that our best vehicle, or do we just try to keep reminding everybody that we've got a problem?
So I guess to directly answer the question about AWC, Lakewood's position is very much aligned with the association's. It was one of the association's top priorities for this session. And so it's something that they worked on, and we kind of, as Lakewood, coordinated with them. In terms of what do we do moving forward, didn't seem to really make much of a difference this year. So should we change strategy? I think that's, I guess to be really candid, I want to have conversations with legislators during the interim to find out what can we do? This is not sustainable, and we need help. So I think at least right now, I don't have a recommendation yet for what the strategy should be moving forward. I think it needs to be informed by the legislators who have a history in the legislature and some of the legislators that are coming in that are wanting to sit in these seats and take tough votes. I think having cities continue to make it one of their top priorities is helpful. The association can only do so much without cities being the spokespeople talking to their local legislators. So the association's, I think, helpful in coordinating messaging and strategy, but it's local cities talking to your local legislators that really influences decisions.
So I would also note that I'm shocked that the bill I spoke to did not pass. I thought it was just so eloquent, and but that, I guess, it just didn't work. I think we'll give it another try next year, and then we'll have to huddle up afterwards to see if we get it. Yes, if not, we'll maybe have to come up with a different strategy. The other thing, and I think you wanted to comment on the $1 billion it looks like they set aside for insurance claims. We're under the same rules, and I think, cities are treated really, cities and counties in the state are really treated as ATMs to an extent. I'm not saying that the claims are not valid, but there's no rational, in a lot of these cases now, doesn't seem to be any rationality between the actual damages and what the lost earnings or various things like that would be. They couldn't even agree on a study. So you're expecting no change. They're just willing to throw billions at it, at least at the state level, and just go along with it.
I mean, to be candid, I don't know how the state continues to have a sufficient amount of money to dedicate towards it. So I guess to answer Councilmember Lindholm's question, that may be the big controversial topic for the 2027 session is tort reform. It's not a topic anyone wants to touch with a 10-foot pole, but because the state is hemorrhaging money, they have to. And if they're going to, then we better hope that they include local governments as well.
Because that goes to school districts also.
Correct.
I know the county, they had to move general fund money that would otherwise have been used to the self-insurance fund to pay claims. Again, not that I'm not saying that the claims aren't valid or not, but it's just, it really is kind of a casino ATM kind of atmosphere right now, because, and I just saw the other day, the state lost a verdict of $130 million. So we'll see what happens, but are there any other questions for Ms. Helder? Thank you very much. Thank you for all your help during the session and guiding us through our day there. And we look forward to next year. We'll see how things play out and what the big issues are of the day. And I'm sure we'll have some asks too. So thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
So next up is Western State Hospital update. We're glad to have our friends here from Western State and to tell us all about all the big construction going on, the single biggest construction project in the history of Lakewood. I don't know if that says a lot, but it's a huge project. Mr. Mark Thompson, Western State Hospital Gage Center of Forensic Excellence CEO, Dave Chipchase, Western State Hospital Quality Manager, and I believe there's another individual here, but I don't have that individual's name on the sheet, so I'll just leave that up to you. Thank
Perfectly
you.
understandable. First of all, is my mic volume okay?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, I'm Mark Thompson. I am the Chief Executive Officer of the Gage Center of Forensic Excellence at Western, which basically means I oversee the 458 forensic beds at the hospital. So those beds devoted to competency evaluation and restoration, and also oversee those patients who are not guilty by reason of insanity. I've had the privilege of having this role for 5 years, and I've been with the hospital for 10 years. And about that same amount of time, David Chipchase has also been with the hospital at Western State. Also with me, I have Melissa Hanson, who is my Chief Operating Officer. And I'm going to invite David up here in a moment because he has been instrumental over the last several years from the pre-design all the way through the construction progress that we've made so far on that beautiful building that is going up on our grounds. So I'm going to give David an opportunity to go through an inside perspective, give you a little preview of what's to come, and then I'll pop back up here and talk a little bit more about some global issues and then be more than happy to answer some questions. David?
All right. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you. Please introduce yourself.
This is Dave Chipchase. As Mark stated, I'm the quality manager for the new forensic hospital, and I've been fortunate enough, thank you, Mark, to be on this project since design phase. So I basically represent the hospital when we coordinate with the architect firm and the construction firm to make sure that we get a hospital built the way that we want it, that Mark and his team can use it properly. All right. So real quick, Mayor, if I can correct you, not only the largest project in Lakewood, the largest project in all the state of Washington monetarily, minus road construction. So that's a pretty, big feather in your hat, pretty cool. All right. So you're already starting off, better than all the other mayors, right? Okay. Real quick, why are we doing this? Well, we wanted to move into the 21st century to take care of patients. We knocked down 13 buildings, one of which was where we housed patients, and that building was close to 75 years old, and it just wasn't keeping up, and it wasn't a therapeutic environment for Mark and his team to properly treat patients. Some of the other buildings we knocked down were condemned and haven't been used in a while, so the timing was right. Thankfully, capital budget came up with the money for us to move into this new beautiful building. But we wanted to build a building that is safe, therapeutic, environmentally friendly, and provides patient care. So real quick, that's a rendering of the new hospital right there. Just to give you perspective, I know most of you have probably driven by it. That is 3 football fields long. So if you stack 3 football fields, that's how long that hospital is. The hospital itself is going to be 475 square feet, and the admin building is going to be 55,000 square feet. The hospital that you see right there is 4 stories, and the admin building is 3 stories. Here's I think a pretty cool photo that shows the progress. It doesn't capture the entire build, but you've driven by it or seen it. We're coming along. In the bottom of the photo, it shows a computer rendering of where we currently are. The green just shows the last thing that we've done. So we poured concrete on that 4th floor right there, the bottom right there. But you can see when you look from west to east, we've quite built out like almost 50% of it. The admin building, which is at the very bottom of it, that's completely constructed all the way up. So now they're working on the inside of it, which is going to take the longest part. The construction team can build up pretty quick, but it's the inside, the detail work that takes a long time. So the design team, the hospital, they employed subject matter experts to design a hospital that is modern 21st century. And they wanted to make it, everyone wanted to make it an area that doesn't trigger patients. A lot of our patients are coming from jails, and jails have a very significant, triggering motion for patients. So if we have anything in a hospital that is similar to a jail, it's very difficult for the therapist to get in there and do the therapy that they want. But yet we still have to build a hospital that is very safe for the patients. So we employed an architect firm that has that experience of building forensic hospitals that don't look like jails, so the therapists can actually do their job. So the physical area is, while it's secure, it doesn't look like a jail, and they can do that. And it shows that the patient, if they're not triggered because there's no bars and doesn't look like a jail, they're in a more of a mindset to be able to heal. So that was a strong theme and something we constantly had to keep working on throughout there. This just kind of shows early on they wanted to somehow tie that back to the Pacific Northwest. And one of the things that they saw that was repeating in the Pacific Northwest when they did the research was a basket weave. So how do we incorporate that basket weave into the hospital? And you can see on the front there, that's the entrance right there. But that veil is supposed to mimic a basket weave. Why I think that's important to show to you guys is when this is all done, right now it looks awful. It's a construction site, doesn't look so good. But when it's done, we want a beautiful building. So our neighbors, when they drive by, it doesn't look like just some glass building or some, really block thing or a bunch of fencing. You won't see that. It's going to look really nice. It's going to not necessarily look like your typical hospital. And that veil is a prominent piece that we believe ties in nicely to the Pacific Northwest. On the same token, we have to employ a lot of people to come to work at Western State Hospital, and we want to keep those people at Western State Hospital. So we want to have areas for staff that they enjoy being at. So there's a staff courtyard that they're going to be able to enjoy, and we also have a cafe that I'll show you later. Same thing with when family members come. I was just recently at the hospital for a quick little stay, and my wife had to come there, and she was commenting how awful the room was. She wanted to be out of the room. She wanted to leave. She goes, "I'm leaving whether you're coming with me or not." That's not the experience that we want parents to come or loved ones to come to see their loved ones. So the first thing they're going to see is the entrance to the visitor center right there. So we want that to be a very nice area, and that's what we're achieving. This is a quick little blow up so this shows the 4 stories. We do have a basement, and that's really just transport of food and goods, laundry, and all that stuff, so it's not disrupting the patients and staff. The first floor is admin and also the intake, the clinic where they're going to get checked in. And then floors 2, 3, and 4 is where the patients will be residing. Here you can see we have a cafe. It goes back to that whole environment that we want to normalize some of the things that they're going to do, because we are going to release these patients to their loved ones or to their next piece of care. We want them to have the ability to do some of that normalization, going to a Starbucks, all these types of things, and for staff as well. So they're going to enjoy that together. Normalize some other activities, yoga, exercise rooms. And here I wanted to highlight, these are the courtyards, and what you won't see in the courtyard is fencing. It's a courtyard that is surrounded by building. And we believe that is better in many ways. Number one, it just looks better in the community if we don't have 18-foot chain link fence with razor wire on side. It also is better for the patients because, again, that's triggering. That's something they came from in jail, and it's something like, wow, we're caged in here, we're jailed and all that. We don't want that. This is just using the environment that here's a courtyard, you're surrounded by buildings, it's safe, they're not going to be able to climb up 4 stories and get out. So I think this is a really elegant solution that the architects developed, and we're pretty proud of it. And there's the just a photo of one of the wards that has the nursing station. It's modern. It doesn't look like a kind of like a prison type system. It looks very modern and inviting. And here's the patient room. And what I'll highlight about this is it's 350 beds hospital. So we're gonna have 350 patients, but each patient's gonna have their own bathroom, their own shower, and their own toilet, which we think is a really great thing because it's their own. They get to then use that, and it's their own home, and they get to heal in their own room instead of having to share something like that. If you've ever had family members, you got to share one bathroom and one shower, there can be some friction there. They have their own. So it's just another way for them to work on themselves and to heal themselves. And with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Mark Thompson, who will talk safety and security. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thanks, David. I appreciate that intro to the hospital. And one of the things that, I like to talk about whenever I get an opportunity in public to speak to communities is I find myself to be a relatively transparent individual. And so obviously safety and security is usually at the forefront of everyone's mind when it comes to talking about Western State Hospital. As CEO, I kind of see that I have, very simplistically put, two primary responsibilities. One is to preserve the therapeutic environment, as Dave mentioned, to assure that the treatment that I'm providing to the patients who are under my care with the greatest, most effective, and most efficient therapy possible to achieve their goals. The second, and equally as important, objective is safety. And that is to keep my patients safe, to keep my staff safe inside the hospital, but also to keep the community safe and fulfill that responsibility that I have as a chief executive officer to assure that we are doing everything that we can to promote safety and security. So one thing that comes to mind frequently is escapes, unauthorized leaves. We have had those occasions occur at the hospital. It's definitely something that we always try to mitigate against. And we talked a little bit a while ago about the community partnership and how it is in the budget. And I won't go into that political aspect, but I am grateful for the fact that it is an ongoing budget inclusion because of the partnership that we have with Lakewood Police Department, with other county departments around the state, so that we do have issues that occur. We are able to mobilize our community partnerships with our Lakewood Police Department to help notify the community, to get that word out and try to bring those patients back if they ever do leave our campus without authorization. So one of the things that Dave mentioned was about the design of that new 350 beds. And that's one of the things that was at the forefront of my mind when we were in the design phase, was assuring that the courtyards are contained, that they may not have the tall fences with barbed wire that no one wants to see. No one wants to make it look like there's a prison in our community, but at the same time, building in such a way that we can assure that our patients will be in a safe and secure environment, not just for them, but also for the community. So wanted to make sure I kept my comments brief because I wanted to certainly give opportunity for any questions. And then if it's anything that I think Melissa or Dave may be able to answer more efficiently than me, I will certainly point to them. But thank you again for the opportunity to be here.
Are there any questions for anybody? So I'll take a run at the most recent. Oh, Mike, are you?
Thank you for being here and presenting to us on more than just the progress, but on the vision of the final hospital to be able to go and do that. Certainly, Western State Hospital becomes a significant employer in the city of Lakewood, and also a customer for a lot of small businesses that provide other things to you. And so we're glad that the state is investing in keeping that economic driver here in the city long term to be able to go and do that. I had two things. It's not like you can finish this hospital and then throw a switch and all the current patients disappear and new patients do. How long do you think the transition from the current hospital's mix of patients to a predominantly forensic mix will take once the building is completed?
I don't anticipate there will be much of a change. The way that we talk about the new hospital, and I'm always sure to highlight this when we're in the community, this is 350 new beds, not 350 additional beds. So currently, the structure of our campus, we have 458 forensic beds, 287 civil beds. Even after this new hospital is constructed, that number of patients will still mirror those numbers. And I think it has yet to be seen where that trend will go in the future. With True Blood settlement and our compliance with that settlement, obviously we know we need a significant amount of forensic beds. We also, though, need a significant amount of civil beds in order to take some of those patients from my center who receive civil commitments if they are found to be continuing incompetent moving forward. So I think as far as the bed allocations go, we'll probably see something similar. I believe there will always be civil patients at Western State Hospital. There will always be a need for those patients who are very difficult to place into the community in an environment outside of a state hospital. I believe even when Governor Inslee stood on our steps and announced his vision for the Forensic Center of Excellence at each state hospital, there was even then an acknowledgement that there are some of those very difficult to place civil patients moving forward. So as we occupy that new space, those 350 beds, a lot of that will be transferring my current patient population over. And the rate with which we'll do that, some of which will be dictated by our path towards certification. It is our hope, our anticipation that this new 350 beds will be able to be certified by the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid to allow not only reimbursement funds from the federal government, but also for the distinction that it provides in being able to bring in residencies, internships for providers, psychiatrists, things of that nature. So no, that was a very long-winded answer to your question, but I hope I got it.
Okay, and how are the changes in the construction type changes and new things going to affect the Child Study and Treatment Center?
Nothing in this design is impacting Child Study and Treatment Center. It's a separate entity with its own chief executive officer. So although we share the grounds, and I know Byron Eagle very well, who's the CEO over there, nothing that we're doing is going to impact that population.
Okay, and then out of curiosity only, in your title, what does Gage refer to?
Great question. So we named the Gage Center after Bruce Gage, who was chief medical officer, and he was also chief medical officer for the Department of Corrections, a long history of being an influential practitioner, really brought that therapeutic mentality to working at Western State, but also when he went over to Department of Corrections. So back when Cheryl Strange was the secretary of the Department of Social and Health Services, she thought it was very important to preserve his name moving forward as someone who'd been very influential in planting that seed, not just for treatment at Western, but especially forensic treatment.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mike. Are there any other questions? So are you going to go through the safety and security slides, or are we just going to ask?
Oh, there we go. So yeah, I can do that. I was making sure that I had room for questions, but if there weren't, I can certainly go through the prepared slides. So when we talk about, unauthorized leave, escape, every patient that we have at Western State has a court order to be with us. So on my side of the hospital, that is usually in the form of an order for an evaluation for competency or restoration of competency. So some patients, particularly on my side, those who are not guilty by reason of insanity, they do have privileges that they can earn. A lot of that was laid out in a settlement called the Ross settlement years ago about how they can move through that privileging system. In order to get those privileges, they are recommended by our own internal risk review board. After that board, it goes to the public safety review panel in the external world that looks over it to give their recommendation, and ultimately the assistant secretary of BHHA makes that decision of whether someone is able to move forward in that privileging system. So we do have patients who will have staff escorted outings into the community where they're with staff. And after they reach a certain privileging level, they will have the ability for unescorted grounds privileges off the grounds, up to the point where they can also be conditionally released, where they may still live in a community program on our grounds, but for all intents and purposes, the judge has ordered that they are conditionally released to be able to access the community freely, but reside in a bed with us in the evenings. Community notification. So whenever we have an issue that impacts the community, if we have an escape, an unauthorized leave, we will mobilize an incident command structure, and then we'll begin going down our checklist of our required notifications. Frequently, that is prosecutor, defense attorney notifications, law enforcement notifications to our partners in the community, and also any victim witness notifications that we need to make. So certainly notifying our law enforcement partners is a very quick one that we do, because we want to assure if we have any situations that go past our boundaries on our grounds, that we are notifying those individuals who are responsible for protecting the communities around us. So when we talk about law enforcement notifications, frequently that will be the chief of police or a liaison in a local police jurisdiction. We have our Department of Corrections warrants desk if the individual is under Department of Corrections notifications, prosecutor, defense attorney, and then any community notifications that need to be done in addition by statute is handled by our Community Notifications Office, which we have 2 individuals who that's their primary job at the hospital for either side, is to provide those notifications to the community. So that is the summary of the prepared slides. Any additional questions about any of that?
Yeah, I do, let's call him patient X. Everybody seems to agree, at least at a number of levels here locally, that we were not given timely notification. So could you go through the time frame as to when he was in the hospital, when you believe he left, and who was notified and when, and explain to us why it apparently took several days before we were notified?
And just to be clear, are you talking about the most recent incident with the individual?
The guy from Clark County.
Egressed from campus. So in our notifications process, and I've heard this from some other community members as well, who is on that list of individuals you notify? And really for us, our key notification is, when it comes to community stakeholders, is the local law enforcement jurisdiction. So in this case, it's the Lakewood Police Department and the prosecutor's office and the defense attorney who represented the individual, or if there is not, that we would inform the Department of Assigned Counsel. So that is kind of our avenue for notifications to the community. We don't have anything formally in place to notify individual cities or counties. Frequently, we rely on our police notification system if there was anything to go out further. I know that there were a couple of bills that were introduced this last legislative session about further inclusion in notification processes. A lot of that was related to the Special Commitment Center. But I think that's an ongoing conversation that we need to engage in with communities about what could be helpful in those kinds of circumstances to formalize that process.
Oh, okay. I'm going to, Councilmember Bell.
Thank you for the presentation. So you keep referring to notifications. Is there an app that I use? Is it something like the Code Red app? Is it something like my Lakewood 311? How is it that the community beyond the city of Lakewood and beyond our police department are getting the notifications?
Currently, when I refer to notifications, most of our notifications are done either verbally, through email, assuring that people get the message. So in this situation, it was an actual phone call to the police department, to our liaison with Lakewood PD. It was a phone call to the prosecutor's office. So a lot of times it's still that pick up the phone, give a call, fastest we can notify. We do not have any notification systems in place for external communications to the community. I believe that was something that had been proposed in the legislative session as well, but we do not have anything more formal that sends out a widely broadcast notification. A lot of times the way that the community will learn about it is from press. So the press will hear about Lakewood PD being informed, and then they'll start asking questions of. the
Right, so there's
administration
no
pieces.
direct notifications from Western State.
There's
It's-
no.
You're
that is
depending on your cities or your police, through your police departments or through the actual news media to get the information out. That's,
At this time, that is correct. There is no formalized system for notifying cities, counties.
okay, thank you.
Yeah, to follow up with that, you had a slide that talked about notifications. And it seemed to focus that you notified the sheriff or the chief of police and prosecutors and things in the places where the person came from, which is very different than Lakewood in some cases, because although the person is here, their problems that caused them to be at Western State may have resulted from the criminal justice system in Lewis County, okay, or somewhere. And it didn't seem that that slide indicated that you made any local notifications, only notifications based on the patient's history of residence, of transgressions, or of legal proceedings. Is that is the slide accurate, or does it omit when something happens at Western State that you make notifications within a radius?
It is correct in the slide deck because the process by which we establish the notification mandate is usually in those court orders that accompany the patient. So in this circumstance, it was Clark County downstate. And so those were our prosecutorial and defense counsel notifications were to Clark because that was where this individual received their court order moving forward. The local notification would be the Lakewood Police Department as it was someone who had left our grounds into the community. But you're correct, beyond the Lakewood Police Department, we do not have anything formalized unless it was a Pierce County case or a municipality case that was local to Lakewood. There would not necessarily be communications to the city.
But would that two separate notification levels account for the fact that perhaps Clark County knew well before we did?
That would be certainly a possibility because they would have been the ones to get that initial phone call.
And is that, I guess, is that prioritization structure in statute or is it in policy?
Some of the things are in statute, like victim witness notifications, Department of Corrections, if they're under supervision. There are other things like the prosecutorial and defense attorney that's in the court orders usually that we receive for competency for patients, or if they're not guilty by reason of insanity, a lot of times it's built into the actual court order about who you notify and when.
Okay, and in our agreement regarding the community policing cooperation that we have with you, is that notification process to Lakewood and Pierce County, because you border the town of Stillicum as well as us. Is that included in that, or could it be?
Certainly could be. I think, this is every time that something occurs at the hospital, I think it's a good opportunity for ongoing conversation about what we can do differently that helps not just the hospital, but the community. So I think I've heard this from all of you here. I had a conversation with Representative Levitt similarly about an incident that happened earlier in the year. So I think it's definitely something, for the hospital, for the Behavioral Health and Rehabilitation Administration and DSHS as an agency to have those conversations, work with our communications department and see what we could do.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Laura Sella.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Thompson. Thanks to your staff for the service they provide to the folks in the state who need this special care. It is really important, and I appreciate it. Two questions specific to, as you called it, an unauthorized egress from campus that occurred. First, do you know how long it took before our Lakewood PD folks were contacted after you recognized that someone had escaped?
I believe the initial notification was probably less than 5 minutes from the time that we found out. And that was from the time that it was initially noted that the individual was missing. To me being notified was 5 minutes. So within that 5-minute time frame, the notification had already been made. What will happen is, and this is just in general, a lot of the details of this specific incident, there's still an internal investigation underway, so I can't be specific, but I can, in generalities, if we ever note that someone is missing, they're not where they're supposed to be, we will initially implement a lockdown of the wards. We will conduct a census check, a head count, assure that we've accounted for everyone. At the moment that we account for everyone and we cannot find an individual, then we will begin that notification process. So it would be to notify Lakewood PD. So there's usually a little time when you don't notice someone that you're going to go check the bathroom, the shower room, ensure that they came back from the treatment mall on time, whatever that may be. But given that we've jumped through those initial hoops, then that would be the next call that we would make to the community.
Okay, great. That's really helpful. And then the next question, and as you said, it's an ongoing investigation, so you probably can't speak to the details. But as you go through this, do you have a root cause corrective action process wherein you'll be able to determine how it happened, how you'll prevent it from happening, and will this new facility theoretically make it less likely that those things will happen?
We do have at the hospital a continuous quality improvement program. So what that means is that anytime there is a significant event, a death at the hospital, or anything that the chief medical officer dubs a sentinel event, we will conduct a root cause analysis. Even if we don't identify it as a sentinel event, we can do something called an intensive assessment that still has that continuous quality improvement and performance dub to it. And so, yes, we are in the process of doing a root cause analysis investigation on this incident, and that will involve an interdisciplinary team that looks at it, that's outside of the hospital chain of command. It's not me sitting on that group to actually look at where things were, what things may have broken down, and then to develop an action plan moving forward that can be monitored by myself and my team to assure that we're being compliant.
Sounds good. And in the sake of transparency, as you opened with, it would be good to share as much of the follow-on events with the community so that there's confidence that this will happen less frequently.
Understandable.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're all very hopeful that the new facility is a little bit more secure than the old one, but yet provides the environment that I think your team spoke to very well for these folks. I am interested in knowing, I would note, I thought the deal with the former governor was that the civil beds would be scattered all over the state in various locations. And I think the hospital in Vancouver's done. I think they found some property in Snohomish County on tribal land so they could get around all the local opposition up there. Haven't heard much else really. And then going through Ms. Helder's work here, it looks like there's been some reductions in construction of the, so can't help but feel that maybe the legislature, after the last governor hit the road, has backtracked on this agreement that we supposedly had, or this promise we had from the former governor that the civil beds would go away, which are really a constant, we believe, a constant source in Pierce County in general, Lakewood in particular, of patients who make it into adult family homes and whatnot. It's a correlation that there are a ton of adult family homes very close to Western State. Not proof, but a correlation. So the civil beds are there permanently now. We're stuck with them.
So
The flips will continue into Pierce County. I know you're not the policymaker, but you are giving us the bad news, I guess, right?
So I guess what I can say is this. One of the characteristics I've found in order to survive the last 5 years in my role is being agile. And I think that is going to be one of the things we need to do moving forward. I think we didn't anticipate when the governor was on our steps talking about things that we would get held in contempt at the agency level and fined $100 million as a state. I don't think we anticipated that we were going to open Olympic Heritage Behavioral Health in Tukwila and have a state agency buy a hospital. I don't think we anticipated that we would finish the construction on the 48 beds outside of Vancouver and not get budgeted to staff the building. So I think it's all of these different things that we have to, a lot of the things that I heard in the initial presentation, I've heard similar things at the state level. So I think agility is the name of the game, and just trying to adapt to make sure that we remain compliant with all of our federal and state and local mandates, but at the same time, trying to have a vision for the future 10, 20 years from now, that we don't end up in a place where we have any kind of federal suit again. So I think that's what I would say, to be cautious. I am just a local guy talking. I'm not an agency representative necessarily on this, but I think that agility is really what we need to hold on to moving forward.
Appreciate you calling it agility. That's great euphemism.
Thank you.
The 287 civil beds, are they going to be a new, are we out of all the old facilities? I got to walk one of the wards there in one of the buildings that I might still be up. Pretty grim. I mean, I would say kind of a One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest with worse, the lighting was worse, feel to it, kind of grim, very institutional. Are those going to remain for the civil folks, or are, when you talk about this great facility and all these wonderful, all this design, does this include the civil or just the forensic people?
So the 287 beds currently of civil patients, 30 of those are in habilitative mental health unit, which is on the west end of campus. It's the low one-story kind of X-shaped building.
Okay.
And the remaining civil patients are in what we call central wards, and that is the building that's right by the flagpole. You can see that building driving past Steelcom. So yes, our civil patients are primarily in that more aged building. I think Mr. Chip Chase referenced that we demolished the oldest residential facility left on campus that was 180 beds. That was in even worse shape than Central. But that is one of the things, the conversations we're having with our partners at the Office of Capital Programs. How are we going to plan moving forward? Currently, the majority of forensic patients are in buildings 28 and 29 on our campus. It's the white stucco building on the north side of campus. Those are newer buildings. Those are 80s-ish. And so, that is one of the thoughts moving forward. Maybe we move the civil patients out of that central building and into that stucco building. I think anything that we can do to continue to provide that best therapeutic environment possible, we certainly want to do. But I think having seen some of the older wards, it does give you that perspective when you look at the new, makes it even shinier in its appearance. So I think the best that we can do to either renovate, update, keep up with kind of assuring that we are providing that therapeutic environment the best that we can for all of our patients at the hospital.
And I think we would agree with that. There have been a lot of improvements over the years, and even prior to this major thing. So I really do appreciate the position you're in. We just, our thing is community safety. Yours is patient and employee safety. And somewhere I think we can agree on, I think there's enough common ground there to figure out that, how this last incident was handled is maybe not the best way. I mean, the question we got was, what, 2 days, what it felt like longer, or so. We're not going to argue about timelines, but we really do need to improve. And maybe there's things we have to do on our end.
Yeah, Your Honor, if I may, I think from the timeline I was given, was less than 2 days, within, maybe a 12-hour day. Again, I know they're doing an internal, so it's hard to hit that. We have met internally this week to review what we can do in the role we can play, and we are under that role of, whenever we receive notification on that, to initiate a press release process to the community. On our press release has a multiple component of different, obviously, press agencies, but also partners as well, which I think Pierce County is part of that as well. So, I want to be able to identify that. I think Lakewood can play a role in that and should play a role in that when we receive notification of that. So at this point, when we have an unauthorized leave from that, and the minute we're notified, we want to start initiating that process in the community as well and be a responsible party in that avenue.
Great. Thank you very much. Anything else for us?
No, and I would certainly be willing to engage in any conversation or discussion that, we could partner with the city. We're very grateful to the city for its ongoing support of the work we do there, and appreciate the opportunity to be here and answer your questions.
Thank you for taking the time this evening. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
So next up is Roxanne Miles, Parks and Recreation Community Services Director. Welcome, Ms. Miles, and you're here to talk about the 2026 Parks Legacy Plan update.
Perfect. Yes. Thank you, Mayor, council members. Happy to be here with you today to give you an update on our legacy plan process. As you know, this is a document that we update every 6 years in order to be able to have it to send along with grant applications and keep us compliant to receive those. But it also provides us a very important direction. I mean, really looking forward and looking out at least that 15 to 20 years so we know exactly where we're going. And again, because it has to be updated every 6 years, we're always refining it, always picking it up and looking a little bit further out. This is an important document that at this point, we're really looking at where are we in 2026? How are we updating our goals, our vision, our progress on where we've been? Being able to look at our inventory, and that's the good news. The inventory has grown a little bit. We've expanded some of the park sites. We've been able to do some exciting projects. And so what is our inventory currently looking at? What is the status of our programs currently? And where are we going to go forward? One of the things we'll be adding in this next plan is a trail section. So it gets to officially go from a PROS plan, park, recreation, and open space, to adding the T on the end and being able to identify our trail system and how we fit in and connect into the broader regional vision for trails as well. The biggest part with every plan is really what we call the demands and needs section. And it's how do we look at where we are and what gaps exist in the system, any shortage of areas in the city, but also that big vision. Where are we short and where's there a gap, and where are we going to move forward in order to close that? And the result then out of that is our capital facilities program. This one is going to go further. The last plan really just looked at the 6 years of 2020 to 2026, which as we stand today, that big question before us is, right, what are the priorities and how do we move forward your vision over the next 6 years, 12 years, so that we always kind of have that follow-up CIP in the queue that gets updated as we make progress on it and move forward. One of the big pieces will be, as the city is now at 30 years, right, looking at the assets that we have, where they are in their life cycle, and then also how do we update and change over some of those amenities with the changes in the community. And another addition to this plan is going to be a strategic management chapter that, in addition to what we might need to build, but what are those policies? How do we make progress on the activities and the programs that, again, are moving us forward? So the structure of the plan has these 8 chapters now. And really, as I mentioned, those first 4, the goals and priorities and demographics, the existing conditions that we have right now in the trails, the recreation inventory, this really is setting the stage as far as all the data set of what we're currently doing. And how do we compare what we currently have with where we should be based on our policy, based on our own growth management plan, but also based on some trends and some comparison to other cities. So those first 5 chapters get summarized, and the data there lend itself into that chapter 6, the demand and needs, which really gives us a clear focus of where some of the spaces and the goals can be set. Then we set that capital and facilities program in order to identify where some of those priorities for investments are. And then it closes out with that strategic management. And how do we move forward in advancing this plan once it's adopted? So the general timeline, there was a lot of outreach. So there was 6 months starting last summer up to February of this year, where there was a public engagement process that was undertaken. And we're going to talk a little bit about those results. But right now we're in the process of adding some data sets, again, looking at our inventory, evaluating all the progress that was already made and bringing the plan current in some of those objective matters. How have the demographics changed? How have our priorities changed? Based on that, then we're going to be able to look at that demand and need, look at what it tells us of where we're at and where we need to go. So all of that analysis then is happening between May, June, and July, so that we will have a draft plan available. As that draft plan is completed, then we're going to be scheduling more time to revisit this out in the community and also bringing it back before you, integrating feedback in September and October that we get from the vetting of the draft plan, and then have it before you for plan adoption and submittal. Our target is to have this updated plan by the end of the year to RCO, which is the Recreation and Conservation Office, because they need to have a fresh one in their files this year before we do our next applications to them. Okay. So one of the big elements of this is what we call, it's our inventory, but also the level of service. How much and where do we offer these things to the community? So the first two items, the neighborhood parks and community parks, we classify them based on how many amenities are in that park. So smaller ones generally, and those that have walking paths, picnic tables, trash cans, benches, they are part of this inventory. The community parks are a little bit larger, and they also have what we call special use amenities, something that a category of our population might be interested in because there's a dog park or a skate park. And that's of interest that people across the city might come to participate in, but these community parks have the parking and the restroom in the space to attract people to come and participate. But we also look across that community park system and see the type of opportunities that we're offering. That includes waterfront access, but things like our skate park, dog park, and now with all the great new amenities at Wards Lake Park. So eventually, once Edgewater is improved, it will join into that community park category. We look at the 10-minute walk shed, which is the current level of service, and that's what the map shows you there. Those pinkish areas all fall within 10 minutes where somebody can walk to a neighborhood or a community park or Fort Steilacoom Park and be able to participate in our park system. So where you don't see any coloring, that's showing us already that somebody lives outside of that radius. And so this plan will really highlight some of the opportunities we have to close some of those neighborhood and community park gaps. Now, the next levels aren't really about a 10-minute walk. The regional park is one major park that we have that has all of our sport complex. It has our nature center experience. It's where we do our special events. So that is one citywide amenity that everyone gets to enjoy. Similarly, our nature areas and our natural areas, a lot of these we do with partners. So it's not about 10 minutes as much as it is how do we make sure that we're preserving that resource, and how do some of those natural areas feed into the tree canopy and the urban forestry program that is being developed and advanced. Urban parks are more what they call nodal. So it's kind of a spot on the lineal park, which is a fancy way to say a developed trail. So there is the plan for the Gravelly Loop. But when you think about a loop and a trail, a little bit different than a standard sidewalk is really, it's got a shared use path and it's got some stops along the way, whether those are viewpoints or places to rest. It's somewhere that might take you from point A to point B, but it's also a place that you want to seek out to be able to recreate out, take that stroll and enjoy the view and the environment as you were doing that. We also have the plaza as at one of our urban parks because it's a downtown location where we can do our celebrations. And whereas we evolve the Street In program, again, that's a spot. These are really spaces where people get to stop and enjoy where they are that don't necessarily have all the park amenities. I mentioned we're bringing the trails in, and the trails is going to be divided between undeveloped trails that are more hiking trails and how we have those in our natural areas and how we connect in with trailheads to our partners' natural areas and those that we share, as well as those linear or urban parks that are actually connections within our road system and loops that provide those park experiences as well. So really already, just to update this inventory, a number of parks moved into that community park category because of some of the investments that were made over the last 6 years. Okay. The outreach, as I mentioned, that phase really kicked off first. There were 6 months committed to that, and that ended in February of this year. There were a number of outreach sessions that staff did to neighborhood associations, really engaging some of our partners and having them promote our survey as well, popping up at the events that were hosted out in the community in order to get feedback. And we're going to have another phase, but the next phase we get into is not focused on the same survey of what the community is interested in. It'll be much more specific to actually start looking at the demand and needs assessment that's going out, making sure we captured everything and looking at what the suggested response is to the demand and need that is summarized in the draft report. So just stepping back a little bit, that community survey, it was given out starting at the American Lake ribbon cutting event, but it did go to all those pop-up events, community cleanup, the survey was on the website. So it was really promoted in a number of ways. So we know we got a small sample there, but we're going to share a little bit of what those results told us overall, because this is just one of the data sets. It's an important one to hear directly from the community. And we're using this data set as well as then looking at the facts and the data of demographics and change and mapping and looking at GIS and where we do have locations. And all that collectively will flow into some of the recommendations. So one of the things that was asked in the survey is, how would you rate the quality of the following park elements in Lakewood today? So you notice a lot of it was, playground, walking trails, dog park. You see that 2.5, people have chosen those elements to be between the fair and the excellent rating. And then we have some mid rating for some other features, and definitely folks looking for greater investment. And we feel like these ratings, right, it depends how recently the park that you are closest to and that you've experienced those things has been updated compared to some of our older parks and assets in the system. So most did score between that fair and excellent. And overall restrooms had the most variation, again, based on the location where somebody may have experienced that. Looking at what the top 3 priorities are that people have for improvements. So this lets us know some of the things that they most want to do. It's not really a surprise to see that walking is up there on top, both on paved and unpaved location, because universally that tends to be one of the greatest interests that people have. But then you look secondarily, we looked at water access, and that beach or water access is there by itself, but there's also the boat launch, the fishing piers that are also kind of called out and listed that were important to people. So it's the water and then what people do there. And then really that playground and picnic shelter and sport courts, many other play features of parks are really spread across and give us a pretty good feel for the broad interest that people have for what they go to the park and what they're able to do. One of the other questions was, what's your reasons for not using, just to give us a sense of some of the barriers that we need to overcome. So I think the good news on this is that there really weren't reasons. Some people, a third, 35%, so there's nothing keeping them from using the parks, that they're very comfortable and able to access their parks. But those that indicated barriers, the biggest were that feeling unsafe, lack of information, or just lack of their own time to be able to go and participate and take advantage of what we're offering. So these really are some of the key takeaways and themes from what the survey phase has let us know. You know, those trails and paths for walking and running are important to people, water access overall, just to enjoy the water, but to be able to do some of the water-based activities, but support facilities. And this really comes into play at our community parks and at Fort Steilacoom Park. Restrooms, seating, shelters, that's really important to folks. And we have a number of picnic shelters, and those are extremely popular because people, it's one of the most affordable, accessible places for them to come together and gather. A lot of diverse interest in these special use facilities, whether it's the dog park, skate park, new requests for cricket fields, any place where people can find to come together and play a distinct activity. To do more programming, more activation of our sites, more opportunity for the community to host events within our sites was a driver, but also just making sure maintenance and preservation of the park quality, right? We have that fair to excellent rating, and how do we get some of those assets back up into a higher rating system that helps just put pride back into the system overall. More information about facilities and programs, address park safety concerns, and then really address some of that uneven access in terms of who wasn't in a pink circle and how accessible different activities are to folks. And then even when it comes to community parks, if your local park is more of a neighborhood one, you're still looking somewhere else for some of those special use activities overall. So one of the things that the plan will really talk about when we say whether we're short or whether we have a gap or we need more, again, it really comes down to what's the level of service standard. So as we mentioned, already pre-adopted via policy was that 10-minute walk shed from all residents. And so that one is a pretty clear map. And we didn't acquire more sites at any point over the last 6 years. There was some expansion to the current sites that we have. So that's going to look very similar to the map that you had there as a draft. So one of the things that'll come out is the possibility to reduce some of those gaps and what those opportunities are, which could be through partnership with other public agencies. With the community park, we mentioned those special use facilities, dog park, skate park, right? So how many should we have within our system that serves everyone? Through National and Washington Park and Recreation Association, they do look at cities of certain size and how many of certain types of amenities per 10,000 or 50,000 of population is one of the data sets that you'll see related to that. When it comes to trails, there is a mile per capita possibility, but probably what's going to come a little bit more inherent in ours is about connectivity. You know, have we closed certain loops, or what are the best routes that can help make those connections that folks are looking for? And we're really building our model on Lakewood's active transportation plan or non-motorized plan, as well as Pierce County's trail plan, to see what some of those opportunities are. But as I mentioned, where already, if there are some good trail systems, how accessible are they for Lakewood residents, or are they having to drive around to another jurisdiction side in order to access that? So it'll be great to see what that mapping shows us and what those recommendations are. I mentioned overall, you saw the rating, and how do we look at reinvestment back into our assets that are the end of their life cycle. So it's known as a PACA score. The Park Asset Condition Assessments have been redone, so that'll be fed in, and we'll really see what type of assets need to be maintained over this time in order to make sure they're safe and functional, or replaced with something new that folks want to do. User experience, we get that primarily as we go out with the survey that we just did for the legacy plan. And then access to programming, it's another area where there is a policy direction to really make sure we're connected enough with the community, embedded enough with the community that we know what everyone else is providing and that we don't duplicate, but we really look to fill those gaps. So out of that analysis, there's already been some priority populations that have been the focus the last 6 years. And so we want to continue to focus on the right populations at the right intensity. How much service do we give with that return on public investment, making sure that the public dollars are really maximized to give the best service possible. So those are those are touch points of what we look at level of service overall. As I mentioned with the equipment life cycle, that's a pretty deep dive assessment about how our current condition is stacking up. We're going to look at the life cycle data. We're going to look at what people said they most want to do, and that really drives some recommendations for specific park sites about what future improvements might be. When we're looking at updating those sites, we have to look at things like design and ADA accessibility and making sure that we're in compliance and that we're able to do some standardization across the system as we make those improvements. And then a big part is funding. So knowing the grant cycle in particular with RCO, the Recreation and Conservation Office, and so they're such a big funder, or what are those grant cycles and how do we set up then the capital program to synchronize with that so that we can maximize our applications based on the priority that comes forward. So with the capital is a big side, this is really on the program areas. We really strongly deliver in 3 core areas. And one is just making sure the community has access to and are able to fully utilize all of our public park assets. Some of that is on a rental basis, if it's for private group use or tournament group of the facilities, but even the picnic shelters, again, we make them affordable and accessible to folks, but they're paying back into the system to use them for their family. We do community garden plots, so we have boat launches, so we manage all those assets. The other part is wellness and active lifestyle programs, and those are very much targeted to specific populations like our senior population, being focused on youth, and then special events, which I think that program has definitely grown over the last 6 years, but are having huge impact. So the priority populations were already low-income youth and senior/older adults. A focus on BIPOC and minority communities, since we're a minority-majority community, is an emerging recommendation in this plan. There's already been a number of art projects and special events that have really focused on how we celebrate the diversity of the community. So that's a very specific way to make sure we're reaching and honoring our diverse populations. And then persons with disabilities, the city partners with Pierce County for a consortium program where they actually provide specialized recreation programming to City of Lakewood residents within their program. And we do basically a per participant payment in order to contribute to that and make sure they're served well. So that gives you a framework for the type of programming recommendations and opportunities that'll come forward with the plan. Overall, just some of the very early findings and doing some comparison of what our system has compared to similar peer cities, including Puyallup and Olympia. And also that NRPA is National Recreation and Parks. They do an average for cities of similar size. And so the ratio of playgrounds, sport courts, and sport fields that we have here in Lakewood per resident is a little bit lower than in other communities. And so we'll be reviewing that assessment of what we count, what we don't count, and where again, and a lot of it has to do with some of our local and community park gaps. Trails, depending on what you count, we might be pretty close on the per capita, so our issue will be a little bit more related to that connectivity and how long and where you get to access those trails. We do have some good special use facilities that people have been passionate about and have been actually part of advocating for and helping to bring into the system. But there are certain elements that we don't have that a city our size has. But one of the deep dives that our consultants will be doing is, what does the city have? And then what does the city provide? There's certain things that if it's a gap that the city might need to step into, there's other elements that really our partners are already doing. And so going back to that philosophy of looking at what's the most important bridge for us to be and closing those gaps overall. So just wanted to end back with the project schedule. As I mentioned, right now we're doing a lot of demographic update, looking at all those different levels of services and drawing the maps about where we're connected and where we're not, where we have service gaps, where our special use amenities are and how it compares to those ratios that are common for cities. And then working on our next phase for the education and outreach. When this draft plan is ready, where all's it going in August and September, and how many folks do Ted and I get to get in front of in order to orient them to plan and get their feedback on each of the chapters. And there's a lot of outdated content that's just being updated. So it's definitely a full court press between now and the end of June and into July, when we get to see internally what that full plan looks like. Give it a review before then it is brought forward to you all and out to the community over the summer.
Thank you, Ms. Miles. Just a couple of things. We had coffee with the mayor out at the pavilion, and you did a very nice job in tying with those folks. This is only the third parks plan we've done since cityhood, and it actually didn't do the first one until 2014. So really excited about some of the things that you're talking about. Trails, which has always been difficult around here, right? Because we just don't have abandoned rail lines that we could jump on and start paving. So it'll be interesting to hear some of those things. And I know someone who used to work for you, she was very passionate about trails. And so I think we met when we were opening the Chambers Bay Trail. The other thing is, if there's anything about cricket, our Councilmember Lindholm is our designated cricket ambassador. And so because he spent many years, huh? You've played it before? Have you played it before? I'm not good. Oh, he's played it before. I knew he would.
He qualifies.
So, and I don't even know the first thing except the guys run, and they always wear white and they look very nice. And so looking forward to all that, I would note for the council, I mean, we can't ask some questions, but we are going to, I think, discuss more of this at our retreat. And this is also just for information purposes, and she will be back here in August with more complete information. So having said that, short question and answer period here, so we can go on. Councilmember Lauricella.
All right, get my microphone to work. Thank you, Mayor Brophy, and I appreciate the idea of a short question and answer period. I have a constellation of questions, but maybe I'll just pick a couple, and if they're not asked by other members of council, I might come back, if that works. So just briefly, you mentioned something about the Gravelly Lake Loop. I'm guessing that is the newly paved sidewalk that goes around Gravelly Lake. Is there any plan for that yet that's established, or are we still working on that?
So the current plan had that, and I believe there's a section remaining to complete it. So that's because it's already been in motion. That's one of the things this plan will be clear about, the opportunity to kind of finish that. But then that core question is, are there any others?
Right. Thank you. You mentioned Ponders Park, which isn't much of a park in our community. I believe there's 2 fences and a set of railroad tracks between it and any residential space. I'm not sure that it is a park that serves our community well at this point. I'm wondering if there's anything we can do with it, or whether it may be something we might want to divest to raise money for the city. I know initially it was probably established to fit within that half a mile gap that we were trying to assess for folks, but I think there are better options. Specifically 2 years ago, Lakewood Water District came to us and offered us a parcel that's about half an acre of flat land, relatively close to Ponders Park. And I know that made it onto a list, but I haven't seen it since. So an update on that might be useful. And then another question, I'm guessing, and we're going to talk about lakefront street ends here in the follow-on piece, but once those are established, do those fall within the scope of the Parks Department, or do they remain within our other departments in the city?
Yeah, so my understanding, right, is that, Parks will maintain it. Once the Westlake is developed, we'll be maintaining that. So prior to development, that's something else. But I think part of that importance of identifying it under the urban park and as a node type of thing is that it really is a resting place and experience. It doesn't count as a neighborhood park in the way the assessment's being done.
Okay, thank you. And then My last question is you mentioned a mountain bike course in your chart. Where is that located in the city?
Wards Lake Park. Come
Okay.
out noon to 2 p.m. on Parks Appreciation Day, April 25th.
Is that the same as the pump track or is it something else?
It's a separate amenity, so it's actually more the backside of the park.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes, much bigger footprint, and they're actually doing some workshops that day.
Awesome. I will be there on Parks Appreciation Day. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Lindholm.
Thank you for this presentation. This is just incredibly helpful, and I look forward to talking about it more. A very quick question. On your top 3 priority slide, I was curious, are folks writing those options in, or are they choosing from a pre-selected list?
I believe it was a pre-selected list with the option to write in. So there is, to your point, I mean, that was a limited repertoire. And so if there's other interests, the survey didn't specifically call it out. They would have had to take the initiative to provide it.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Brandstetter.
On the, in the whole presentation, you didn't mention anything about safety. And public safety in parks is something that we hear about more frequently. Whether it has to do with the behavior of people who are in parks, whether it's the enforcement of rules and things that we have, but that are there, but people don't perceive that they're being enforced, being able to go and do that. And there didn't seem to be a spot in the plan of where we were going to address existing or emerging safety needs that are there. And I guess in a final version of it, I think that the perception, and there is by some people, that certain spaces in parks at certain times of day or are not safe is something that should be addressed to see whether or not there are, particularly in capital improvements, but also in procedural and policy improvements that we can make to do that. And I would expect the plan to at least acknowledge that concern and structure ways in an ongoing way to constantly review and perhaps deal with it. For this August, there was a list of things that said, things over there, and the last one said RCO review.
Yeah.
What is that?
Yeah, absolutely. First one, right. So that strategic management chapter 8 is a new addition to the plan, but things like safety and responding to those things that aren't about building things will be part of that particular chapter. RCO is the Recreation and Conservation Office. We have to submit the draft plan to them early, and they give feedback to basically tell us, yes, you're on track. And if you complete the plan the way you have it designed, we will accept it as your required strategic plan for you to be able to apply for grants. So it's a state of Washington granting authority.
So, and what are the consequences of them not accepting it?
We would not be able to apply to them. And so, for example, Edgewater and Wards Lake Park one had 3 and the other one had 4 RCO grants associated with it. So it is the most common granting source for park projects in the state.
So what are the most common things in your experience that they don't like?
I think they are relatively accepting of a plan, and it's not that they evaluate our management strategies as much as they look for soundness, and that the plan has each of the chapters that are listed there. So when we present for grants, we really have to talk about that demands and needs section in particular. and how what we're going to build is a solution that ties to that.
And then you had a slide that said we have less of certain things than our peer cities of average size. And that it includes Puyallup and Olympia. And that I guess when you're looking at size, was that a population measure? And Puyallup and Olympia are much older cities that have been cities that have been working on building their park system for much longer than Lakewood. And I would be interested in also benchmarking against, there were quite a few cities in the region that incorporated in the 25 to 35 year ago window. University Place, for instance, is about the same age as us and has been spending, so it's had about the same amount of time as us to do that. Federal Way is not much older than us, and so they've had, again, it's similar cities that evolved from a county system and then enhanced it as a city. And so I'd be interested in also benchmarking against other cities that have been at building their park system for the same amount of time as us, because I think we would benchmark more soundly against them than a 100-year-old city that's been doing that.
We can ask our consultants to include something based on that parable. I think they brought these forward because when people around this area think about city systems, that's what comes to mind, but we'll definitely.
So it's Puyallup, Olympia, Lakewood, and
We'll ask them to,
Oh.
we'll bring forward, we'll work with them to identify that. too.
But thank you, Mr. Mayor.
thank you. Thank you, Ms. Miles. We look forward to August.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Oh, wait, we have one more. Councilmember Talbot.
Sorry, and I'll be quick. And to council members, Branstetter's point, I appreciate that comment and that question. I frequently do. I have, excuse me, more and more looking at the city of Shoreline, which is incorporated in the same year, similar population to Lakewood today, similar growth projections for 2044, similar demographic somewhat. And so you may, I would, if we meet any of their council members at AWC, that would be beneficial for us too. Thank you very much for your work and particularly incorporating trails and noting trails into the parks plan. I have, excuse me, often, I live close to the Flet Creek area and so all that land that has just been untouched for years. And it has always been my hope that someday the city would be able to recognize and do something with that open space and acknowledge it and incorporate it more in some way that is more meaningful and certainly accessible to our residents. So along those lines, the Leaf Line Coalition and the Forever Green Trails Association, I am familiar with in my professional work, but also as a trails enthusiast. And it's my understanding that you're very close with the Forever Green Trails Association as well. And I spoke with their executive director recently. I don't know that the council has ever had a formal introduction and introduction to their work and to their organization. And I do think that it would be beneficial to invite them sometime, the Forever Green Trails organization, and perhaps even David Urbina from Leaf Line Coalition, to allow us to get to know their organizations and where the city of Lakewood fits in their map and also fits in a regional trail system in Pierce County in general. So I just want to plug that. The map on the slide earlier in your presentation, I would like to talk about this map more at our retreat. To me, this map tells a story in and of itself that is not a very talked about story in Lakewood, and that is the equity and accessibility of our neighborhoods to not just parks, but to commercial shopping, our everyday destinations. So I appreciate that this plan will dive into those areas that are not highlighted in red. And to your point about focusing on the non-motorized improvements, you know, here you've spoken about that the red indicates a 10-minute walking distance, but we should also accommodate for bikeability and getting to our parks destinations as well, particularly because in the current 2020 Parks Plan, there are some very strong maps and just demographic maps in and of itself that tell the story of the barbell community that we are and the number of languages that are spoken at home where English is not a primary language. And so I just want to highlight that for me, equity is a huge piece of everything that we touch, but our parks in particular, because, you know, looking at this map and seeing that areas and neighborhoods like Lakeview, parts of Lake City, and even around Dower, or that flood area have very little accessibility to formal park facilities. But in fact, it is true that there are also elementary school areas that there are accessible to. And so to me, that speaks to the strength and the facilitation of partnerships that we need. So my last question, and I could keep going on, but what are for you at this point with your work on this plan, what is for you like the top 3 nonprofit organizations or government agencies that we should be strengthening and working with the most to strengthen our partnerships with when it comes to accessibility and park and recreational opportunities, even if it's programming?
Yeah, and I think, you know, some of this, having the demands and needs complete, I'll have a more thorough answer. But, you know, Conservation Futures, we do have a Lakewood representative on the board, and a lot of times acquiring properties is best through that. And then looking both through that in the school district when it comes to, you know, lands. Lakewood Promise, I know that particular advisory group is connected to a lot of youth-serving organizations and wants to kind of evolve the assessment information. So one of the good things, you're going to see all of that in there, right? And so that's kind of what I get excited about a plan, is it actually brings forward all the information, all the questions that you have, to try to make sure all that information is there at one point to make those decisions overall. So, I mean, those are the 2 that come to mind in initial starting, but I'm sure there will be a sound third that comes through again with these management strategies and how we can actually take those incremental steps, because once a plan comes out, right, that's a plan, that's a direction, but actions have to be taken.
Thank you, Ms. Miles, and I would agree with your assessment on both those cases. I think there's groups out there that want to help us with tree planting, which is a great segue into the next item. And also, I don't think that we've made over the life of the city use of the Conservation Futures Fund. We used it a little bit over in Springbrook Park to get the addition there, but their opportunities do present themselves, and I don't know that as a city we've institutionalized taking advantage of which our citizens pay into, by the way, which a lot of the money then goes off to, keep Peninsula and Anderson Island or whatever to protect lands there. But we've been not, I don't think we've had enough foresight in that regard. So I look forward to that. Thank you very much, Ms. Miles. Do we want to take a break? Yeah. Let's take a 10-minute break. So we'll meet again at 9:10 and we'll get these last two items. Hopefully, we're taking about 40 minutes an item. So right now we're heading towards council member comments somewhere around, it's gonna be late, 10 minutes. Thank you. We'll come back into session, and the next presentation is a review of an amendment to the agreement of the U.S. Services for the Natural Environment and Climate Change, NECC program. Ms. Tiffany Spear, our planning manager, is here to make a presentation. Thank you, Ms. Spear.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council, and I will apologize ahead of time. I am still fighting something off, so I may have to pause and cough. I apologize for that. Page 101 is where the information for this topic begins. And if you'll recall, those of you who were on council at the time, there was already action taken last September by the council to approve a contract 2025-184 with EXP Services for work related to the urban forestry program that was going to be funded through ARPA, as well as the City Tree Fund. However, since then, and as was done by this council in February of this year, there has now been a commerce contract awarded to the city of Lakewood for $355,000 that would in turn cover most of those costs that were going to be covered by the dollars identified originally last year out of ARPA and the Tree Fund. So as a result, we're coming to the council to say the request would be to change the source of funding and the budgeting for this contract 2025-184 with EXP Services. But B, to also say because of the influx of funding through the Commerce Grant, we are actually able to expand the scope of the contract with EXP Services between now and next June 30th in order to cover more of the topics that they are hired to do in relation to House Bill 1181 state requirements. So this is now the presentation which follows page 181. So you'll see it, I believe it starts on page 103 is the PowerPoint that I'm now walking through. So the scope changes in summary. At the time the contract was drafted, there was a thinking that there would be a consultant-led advisory team related to climate actions. That has been changed through council action for direction to the Planning Commission to take on responsibility of convening task forces, and they are actually going to be looking at names of members for those task forces in 2 days on the 15th. And then the groups will start to meet in May. So that work is getting started. Urban forestry, there's an expanded scope of work that now we have additional funds available that can be done in this biennium, including city tree planting plans, as well as developing the full urban forestry management plan as is required under state law. It also is bringing in House Bill 1181's a few other items in this biennium rather than having them postponed till 2027 related to heat mitigation, for instance, and planning for how to deal with that in the areas most significantly hit within the city. And then the public process, as you see, at one point was being contemplated as EXP Services would be leading most of that. Now with what the council has had the Planning Commission stand up to do, that will be more of city-led, and city commission-led, I should say, excuse me, and the consultant will be in a support role. So I mentioned 1181 requirements. We are going to be working through the task forces to refine the new changes to our existing climate element of our comprehensive plan to have now distinct climate resiliency and then greenhouse gas emission reduction sub-elements. There will also be a review of environmental justice and also wildfire risk and open space review. And then there will be a technical analysis conducted, which will be further fleshed out in the next biennium, but between now and mid-27, it'll be looking at emissions inventory. In Lakewood, the highest greenhouse gas emission items are transportation, unsurprisingly, and buildings, but taking a look at that inventory and updating the data that we've had collected over the last 5 years or so. So in terms of dollars, what we're talking about is originally when the council adopted or took action to approve contract 2025-184, it was going to be funded to a total of $300,000. 190,000 of that was coming from the ARPA's urban forestry dollars, and then the remainder was coming from the city tree fund. Now, however, because we have the state commerce grant available, which totals 355, we are increasing the scope, which then increases the total of the contract and lessens what is required to be done in 27 through 29. And then it reduces completely what would have come from the city tree fund, freeing that up for other directly related city actions as anticipated by municipal code, as well as reducing the amount significantly coming from the ARPA dollars, again, leaving funding available for other things such as the existing partnership that's been formed with Pierce Conservation District for our spring urban tree sale. We're in the midst of working on potential memorandum of understanding with Tacoma Tree Foundation as well as the Tahoma Bird Alliance. Partnerships for other activities throughout the rest of this year as well. And PPW and the Parks Department are working also to figure out what kind of programming about education and then provision of trees may be available to the general public through certain parks events that are already scheduled throughout the year. So essentially what this contract change would do is expand what can be done because the funding goes up in total, but it also is freeing up significant dollars from ARPA that can be used this year for tree plantings, for instance, as opposed to just the planning items, and also reduces by full the amount that would have coming out of the city tree fund. So happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Spear. So this basically is putting the changes into effect that we've already approved.
Correct.
Basically by acceptance of the grant. Okay.
Correct.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for Ms. Spear, Mr. Lorisella?
Thank you, Mr. Boki, and thank you, Ms. Spear. So monies are being returned to the tree fund. Do we have an established plan for how tree fund dollars are going to be spent in the near term?
We do not in the near term because it is not currently included in the city's budget. So it will be coming to you as part of the 27-28 biennial budget review.
And how large is the tree fund outside of this?
Very roughly speaking, it's at about $750,000 right now. That is because, however, of several large projects that have paid fees in lieu of tree planting on their property, for instance. And so there is no deadline for when those funds could be spent as of now. That could change with how the budget actions go, but it shouldn't be assumed that that balance may be that high for a long time. That just happened because of a couple big projects.
Okay, thank you. And then the ARPA funds that are being taken out of this, we've designated that they need to go to other projects like Edgewater Park, for instance. Is that correct?
Under ARPA, what has happened is by the end of 2024, the city council had to say, this is where all the dollars will go.
Mhm.
What has happened with the funding for urban forestry is there was a separate line item said this much money will go to that. And then having said that, within it, there's some discretion as to where that would go. So what is being anticipated right now is the ARPA dollars would be covering the partnership with Pierce Conservation District, Tacoma Tree Foundation, both of which would be providing trees for the public to be able to plant on their own properties, looking at other outreach at events, and it's looking at actually Ms. Talbot, Councilmember Talbot mentioned the need to keep track of equity information and environmental justice questions. That is also being ARPA dollars are also funding a map tracking system for that. That's required under state law. So we've got that in place.
Were those things not funded before putting this back in, or how does that work?
They would have not been funded. So there would not have been the opportunity to partner with those other outside tree advocates, if you will. And there would not have been the ability to keep that funding for the map in place.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lorisella. There are no other questions. Thank you very much. And
Thank you.
this will be on the agenda next week.
It will be. Thank you.
So up next is the review of survey and encroachments for street ends identified for volunteer programming. We do have a memo in the, but this is not a future action item, I don't think, for us. This is just what we have asked the Public Works Department to put together. So Mr. Remack, you've got this one?
Yes, Mayor.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, City Council. Tonight, we'll be going over some draft framework evaluation for really street ends and encroachments that we're looking at. So when we came forward with the volunteer program previously, looking at the street ends, we followed and designated the program, but we did not have a set framework or unified methodology with which we would look at any potential encroachments that would be in street ends. So the memo before you tonight is really what we're going to kind of walk through and talk about what staff has laid out as a draft for that framework, and conversation and input from city council as to what they would like to see in that framework, right? So the American Lake, Steilacoom, Lake Steilacoom, Gravelly Lake, and Lake Louise are the 4 lakes that really a lot of street ends butt up and butt to, and what we've looked at. So when we moved forward with the volunteer program, it was a pilot program, and we looked at 4 locations that we were going to move forward with that. Those locations were chosen based on the 2023 survey, and it was really also about the ability to approach and be able to use those lake ends with minimal access as like a volunteer process as we went through it, right? So those locations, when we looked at it, were Westlake Avenue, Holden Street, Lake City Boulevard, which all ranked very high in feasibility, and then 100th Street, which ranked as a medium on the feasibility. When we were looking at the feasibility for going down and being able to use the water, we utilized some guidance that we'd received when we were looking at the volunteer program. You have some clear delineation of the left and right limits when it comes to the right of way, any existing encroachments that would be looked at, and then any potential neighborhood conflicts related to parking and any potential for ADA accessibility. To do that, we needed to go ahead and get a survey done so we knew specifically where the edges of the right of way were and what, if anything, was encroaching into our public right of way. Right. When we moved through that, the survey did show there were varying levels of encroachments that existed. And really, when you speak to that, it could be anything from there's a small planter bed that's encroaching to a driveway, that could be encroaching and exists there. So we came up with a framework on how to look at these and how to try and categorize the encroachments that we were looking at. So first thing we did was establish a structure and approach to how we looked at it as the feasibility of restoring or improving the public access, a consistent response to private encroachments within the right of way so that we were looking at it the same way. It wasn't subjective, changing from site to site. Preservation of shoreline function and a public benefit, meaning the ability to access the water. When we look at that, we're talking about things like the ability to launch a kayak, get down to the edge of the water, spend some time there, potentially fish, things of that nature. And also if there is a large enough encroachment, the need was there to look at any potential vacation that would be inappropriate. So the framework when we looked at it was first to go out and confirm if it was in fact a street end. So we've had the study is what we're looking at. So that's very straightforward. Yes, it's a street end. Okay. And then go ahead and do an assessment of the public access for feasibility. In 2023, like we said, when we went through, we looked at a number of things that came in. So we already kind of have a matrix as to what's easy access and feasibility to get down to the water and what is not. But we did want to see if it would hit just 3 items, particularly when it comes to public access, a minimum of like a 6-foot accessible path to get down to the water, an area down at the shoreline, minimum of like 10 by 10 for the ability to launch or retrieve a kayak and what we're looking at. And then physical safety and ADA feasibility for getting down to the water. Those were important. After we'd done that, if that was a feasibility, we would move on to the next step, which would be actually to go and get the inventory of the encroachments, which would involve a survey and what we're looking at. So we would move forward with looking at a survey, see what encroachments exist. And then after we've had that and discovered which encroachments we'd have, we would start to move through the classification of the different encroachments and kind of what we're looking at. There are really 4 different encroachments we looked at. One would be a critical obstruction that completely blocks access. And the second would be a major structural. It's a significant, but not fully blocking access. Example would be if there was a driveway, something of that nature for access to a home. That would be a structural feature that would be important to the home. Minor non-structural, easily removed, kind of like those garden beds, chain link fence, something of that nature. And then any peripheral or harmless, no real impact to access. There's a fruit tree or something of that nature, everybody can walk around it and get down to the site and what we're looking at. Once that classification is determined, we would have to look and determine a resolution path. So critical obstructions, we would removal required or consider street vacation only if access could still be preserved. By that, looking at, do we have the ability to come down, still get down to the water feasibly and move through it? There's a number of them when you went through the 2023 that I kind of identified, routes that went around different structures that existed, still use of the site and where we're at. Then the other one we look at it would be if there was a major structure, those would be looked at on more of a case-by-case basis as to what we needed to do, right? If there's a driveway surveying the house, when was the house constructed? How do we move forward with maintaining and finding a balance and really where we're at? And then the next one we look at would be minor encroachments. We would look at those for mandatory removal, right? There's no reason that a chain link fence needs to stay in it. If we're going to develop it, it can be easily pulled back to the edges of the periphery. And then a peripheral or harmless. If there was no impact to it and it could still move forward with the use. If a tree is there that was planted that happens to be, if there's a small edge of a planter box, something of that nature, it would not be something that we really looked at as long as we could still meet the main use and the access purpose. All right. The one issue we'd run into, if it was applicable, would be an evaluation of street vacation. This would be specifically when we run into ones that have structural impact for someone's home and what we're looking at. This would not be something of the nature of like, I have planter boxes and I wish to keep it. It's like my driveway, my access to my home, how I get in my garage. Then we would come through and we'd start looking at a resolution as to how we get there. Can we still meet the public access standards? Can be fully maintained? If removal is infeasible, then we look at what the other alternatives are. That might be vacation of the driveway area while retaining the rest to still provide public access. The idea would be that there'd be no loss of shoreline function that would occur by any sort of vacation that would be like that. And then the public benefit would still be preserved and compensation would be provided for the area that would be looked at for vacation, much as we did with any normal street vacation. Once we had that, we would present the site conditions and outcomes to the council for policy direction and authorization of the next steps on how we would choose to move forward. And then we would document any final direction we were and then move from there. That's the outline of the basic framework that we looked at for how we could look at it, equally based on site so that we'd be able to use the same body and guidance to be uniform across all the sites when we look at it. That was really what I had to present. I'm open to any inputs or feedback or direction from the council.
And speak to page 110, next steps.
Sure. It is recommended the city council discuss and provide feedback and concerns regarding suggestions on the draft framework. Following that, we'll take direction. Staff anticipates returning at a future meeting with resolution for council consideration and adoption that incorporates components of the discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Remack. Are there any questions for Mr. Remack? Councilmember Pearson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have so once you get to the end of step 3 and you've gone through the infeasibility or whatever, what does it really mean? It's not going to be added to the program and like the bus stops there, I guess. So do we recommend anything else, or is it just that property is just going to sit there forever and we're not going to get rid of it or do anything with it? It's just going to sit there. Is that what that means?
So you're talking about the inventory on any encroachments? I'm sorry, I'm looking at the.
On so step 2, access public access feasibility. And then it says the standards are minimum continuous pedestrian corridor, preferred corridor up to 10 feet, yada, yada. Key questions: can safe pedestrian path be established given slope vegetation, shoreline conditions? A few other things here. Outcome: if infeasible due to physical site constraints, document limitations and recommend the street not be added to the program. If it's feasible, then proceed to step 3. So what is that first part of the outcome? Do we do anything else with that? Or is it just like, oh, this just sits here as unopened city right of way and we're never going to do anything? We're not going to sell it. We're not going to improve it. We're not going to.
There's always option really to what the city council would like to look at that. when we were looking at this, this was involved in moving forward for volunteer and being able to, if we have a piece of property though that we look at and it's completely infeasible for development, by that meaning, say High Bank waterfront, we're never going to be able to get down to the water to do what we're going to do or provide public access. The council does have the ability that they could look at if they wanted to divest themselves of that piece of property. There is vacation allowances that exist within the code, but that's not something we looked at here because that's not been a direction that we've looked at or told to look to.
Okay, so I guess if someone did come to us with one of those properties that we had put on the list that we're not looking to add to the program, then that would be, I guess, a starting point for a potential
Yeah,
vacation request.
they could request vacation if they wish to. It'd be the same standard process that we looked at
Yeah.
and what we go through for any of the street ends, and then it'd come down to a council decision. This one, it might just be a little different in that there was already some pre-feasibility work done while we were looking at it for city and public use that we determined that wasn't feasible.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Remack? Ms. Talbot?
Thanks, Mr. Remack. I will say, I think that for the benefit of council, I was surprised that this item didn't come accompanied with, at least in the council packet, the street end report, the 2023 street end report, because I think that is a huge piece that provides a lot of background information that is necessary to have this meaningful discussion. So if we do end up continuing this discussion in retreat, which I hope and I think we will, I think that please bring some graphics, maps, and that street end report back in the packet for the official public record. I think that would be helpful.
I would gladly bring that forward. The one thing I wanted to just make sure when we're looking at it is the 2023 is not the survey of what the encroachments are that exist. So while it's representative of the street ends that we have, it's not representative of what we're looking at here in terms of what is encroachment, what is not. It does have some items when it went through by the contractor that says there are known encroachments here, High Bank waterfront, inaccessible for ADA, things of that nature. So no issues with bringing that. I just want to make sure that the scope of what we're looking at is understood when we look at that 2023 packet.
Sure, and I understand that. And I guess I would add that until there are formal surveys to be shared with us, then I look to that 2023 report as the best available information we have to refer to. So that's why I think it is a critical piece of information as a reference document in this conversation.
Sure.
But I think, I have a slew of questions, but I guess just starting with the first. So I just want to understand the first step. So the first step, you're suggesting that if there is any form of dedication or easement on the property, then on the street end, then we're just not even going to touch it.
So that is a councilmatic decision is what they want to do with it. What I would say is if someone has an existing easement or variance that existed prior to incorporation of the city protecting their property, that's a legal question beyond me as to what the council would choose to move forward with that. But when we look at those, yeah, that would be one of the things that we would flag and say there is already a predominant use and paperwork associated with that, and you would have to speak with legal as to the path forward.
Okay, so I think, because I guess the question for me is, doesn't that kind of conflict with then step 3 or 4, where if there is an encroachment that is documented or there is a dedication, but it's not entirely covering the entire street end, and so some of the street end would still be viable for public access, are we saying then we're just not even going to touch that street end and try to preserve public access and try to carve public access through? If there's an encroachment and it's documented before incorporation, then our hands are clean. And then is that
So
my interpretation?
I'll be honest, what I'm saying is if there was a home or something that was sitting there that had documented yes, the recommendation would be to look at, can public access be provided going around that without removal?
Thank you. Yeah, that's what I was trying to get at, because I think that that's still, I understand, and I even understand viewing the report. I mean, there are going to be impertinences and encroachments in the street end right away, whether it's a retaining wall or a built structure, but there still are, there still are movable parts, or I guess accessible parts of that street end that we should try to maintain as much as possible, because even in our shoreline master program, we do have language in our shoreline master program that does call for preserving public access, including the street ends. I mean, the street ends are called out in the shoreline master program. So I just want to make sure that that this process is consistent with that.
So when we're looking at the 4 categories that exist, there is the one where there's a critical obstruction that's blocking the entirety of the one. So that'd be like category 1. And sorry, I'm looking at step 4. So if we're wanting to look at the same information, I'm at step 4. That's blocking the required pedestrian corridor for the shoreline use in the entirety of the area, right? Going forward from there, there would need to be a discussion with the city council as to how they wish to move forward. We would look at that and we would have a conversation about it, but that is not an action that the department alone could take in making a recommendation as to what we do. Category 2 would be one similar to, I'll use 100 Street because it is the one that we know. When 23 came out, it was designed for the preliminary design, went around the existing carport, still provided full access down to the waterfront and the ability to access the waterfront. That would be something we would look at, like along the lines of a category 2, access is still available. Category 3, non-structural, is a fence or something that's in the way. And then when you get down to category 4, talking about really like raised garden beds. As to what the council or how they wish to deal with that, that is 100%. We can follow whatever direction we're given. What we're looking at is a framework. So when we come in, it is not every time we bring it, we have a discussion. What do we do with this one specifically? And what we're laying out, it's like, this is the basic framework that's been set, how we'll move forward. If we hit this stop gap, then we have to stop and we go back to the council and have a conversation.
Yeah, I understand. Before I get ahead in some other questions,
Sure.
In our council agenda packet, in the items to be discussed at our next study session regular meeting, there is an item to amend an agreement with Facet Northwest, so that we understand fully what we're discussing here today. Can you tell us what will we be asked to amend next week in that amendment?
It's just a minute, when they did the initial design contract, they put it basically at an estimate of dollars. It's just to continue the work on that, to move forward with some of the components related to shoreline variance that was initially anticipated, what it takes to move out there to do some of the redesign work, includes some filtration, I believe, in terms of the soils and some of the design work like that. So it's really more of the engineering design.
Okay, thank you, thank you. I think the biggest question and concern I have is when we in the process, when we're considering allowing a variance to divest of the encroachment, if you will, why have we not looked at a process that is perhaps the opposite of vacating the street and instead permitting an encroachment to be there, so that allows the council and the city to recognize that there is a permanent or immovable encroachment that cannot be easily removed, but yet still comes with revocability, so that if and when a property turns over in the future, the homeowner sells it or wants to or needs to physically do something to that encroachment, that that at least that it is still recognized and acknowledged that that is still within the city right of way and can be subject to removal in the future if possible.
So I will say the reason that Planning and Public Works has not looked at that is that there is value to the property in which we look at. And if the city council wished to take a look at how they wanted to approach it, whether it was a long-term easement, name the mechanism that you're looking for, that is something within the council's purview as to where they want to, but that is not anything that exists in Title 12 that the Planning and Public Works would have looked at as a mechanism, and it would be something that I would recommend that there was conversation with legal counsel as to what the long-term impacts to that potentially are as you're tying it to someone's home, title, things of that nature.
I would like us, I would like us to consider that as an option. And because I think that if we don't consider that option, then with the process that we have laid out in front of us today, I think it runs the risk of appearing that simply vacating an encroachment into the street end and compensating that property owner can appear to be a gift of public funds, in my view. And so that's why I think that a path that considers permitting, issuing a permit for that encroachment to be there, holds the city to a higher standard of being accountable to preserving public access and maintaining public access first, and also maintains that right to do so. So that would be my concern and request in this.
Yeah,
So-
I'm gonna
Go ahead.
jump here. I mean, I appreciate Councilmember Talbot's, because I think she's brought it up before, but that's outside of the scope of this. Is that correct? I mean, you're saying it's a different part of the code to how
So,
we dispose of.
so I'm not saying it's a different part of the code and how we dispose of it. What we're looking at currently here is how council wishes us to move forward if we ran into an encroachment of that nature. So what Councilmember Talbot is speaking to is an idea or an option that the council could direct us to look at the feasibility on. It's just not one that the Planning and Public Works has presented as an option.
Okay, we're gonna have, because we have not treated these things this way. We've only had one sale, I think, since I've been on the council, and we shouldn't have done it. I believe we were, misled as a council on the property. I really want to go forward with this because we really need to clear up. Have we cleared up the volunteer thing? Or do you need this to clear up the volunteer thing?
So the volunteer program has been established. How we move forward with that volunteer program and revise some of the encroachments, we will need this framework to be able to do that.
Okay, so you need this. Councilmember Lauricella.
Thank you, Mayor Boki, and thank you, Mr. Remak. I support Councilmember Talbot's suggestion that we consider other options for encroachments up to and including whether we essentially lease that space to them for a given amount of time, subject to when that property changes hands or an improvement is done on it, so that the city has sort of a right of first refusal. And it becomes revenue generating and is just something to consider as an option. So I support what she brought up as something we should potentially consider at the retreat.
Yeah, and I think we can talk about it at the retreat. I really don't want to hold up this legislation. It's been 30 years.
Mhm.
And delay is opposition, as far as I'm concerned. Anything about delay, about fixing these up or doing this West Shore or whatever is, and I've heard it from people who want more access to land. All I hear is delay is opposition.
Yeah.
So how we're going to handle this, some of these unique characteristics of trying to do this, we're not going to get rid of any property.
Yeah.
Until we know what we're doing, got this. The key is to get West Shore done. we can't even do that, then we really, really need to take a strong look at what our commitment is here towards public access, period. If we can't get West Shore done, we've been talking about it now for 30 years. We've had 3 studies. There's no more studies. We're not doing any more studies. We'll either just sell them or we'll develop the ones we can develop. And then we'll have, now, these other items we're going to have to talk about. This is really, in my mind, it's very complicated. I appreciate Councilmember Talbot bringing it up, but it is complicated in my mind. I think we need to go forward with this. If there's another path, but I think we're also getting in the discussion about how we want to dispose of things. I don't want to have that discussion, but I do want to protect our rights. So work from that.
Yeah.
Councilmember Lauricella.
Thank you, Mr. Boki. I wasn't quite done yet, but
Okay.
I agree. We need to have some urgency on this. I am personally incredibly frustrated that it's taken us 3 years from when I got on council, and it was one of the first things we brought up, especially when it comes to things like Gravelly Lake, which a large amount of our community is very frustrated with us as a council and their neighbors who have blocked access. I think that needs to be addressed as we go through this. My last question is, have we set a precedent with other properties that had encroachments that we took moves forward on that involved access to lakes?
I do not have an answer for that question. I'm unaware currently of any locations for street ends that we've.
Right, and I'm not necessarily
given
referring to
away.
race.
It would predate me. Since I've been here for 2 years, it has not occurred. I cannot speak to what might have happened before.
And I'm not necessarily referring to a street end as much as a piece of property that had lake frontage that had an encroachment on it that we took action on.
That we owned?
Yes.
I do not know. I don't have an answer for that.
Okay, thank you.
Looking at Mike, I don't think we have. We just sold off that one property. Councilmember Branstetter.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I agree with you that the process that's being proposed by is at least is a unified way to begin to look to evaluate each street end. I think that as you get down this evaluation route, there are multiple possible off-ramps as to what is the long-term future of a given street end, and or the options available to fairly deal with things that are within the right of way, but that there's but that it isn't fair to just say remove it or the city to take it over to do that. So what the city has not had for 30 years is a conscious way to actually evaluate street ends. We have had the Parks Board look at street ends only from the point of view, are they viable to be developed, and not really looking at what's a viable way to go about resolving encroachments or accepting that encroachments are there and to move those encroachments out of city ownership to be able to go that either through direct sale of vacation of the land or of issuing an easement for a period of time to the owner user of the encroachment to be able to go and do that. But either of which would generate some money to help develop other street ends on the same body of water. The one time that the city has actually sold a street end was a situation that developed where neither the city nor the property owner realized that it was a street end. And we got well into the process, and then ultimately, it wasn't something that there was an encroachment into it. It was completely absorbed into homeowners' property. And the solution was to just sell that Lakeland a piece of property to the property owner at a fair price as if it was a residential lot, and the money was used to enhance American Lake Park. But for too often, this council, earlier versions of this council have just shied away from actually making serious evaluations of street ends. So this is a process where all street ends will start to be looked at along with the same process. And then as the uniqueness of a street end emerges through this study, then strategies can evolve. And so I greatly appreciate the fact that staff has gone to the trouble to create, not just try to solve a problem at one street end, but to create a process to solve the problems eventually at all street ends.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Vansitter. Okay, so everyone, first round talk, because then we're going to go back. Okay. Councilmember Talbot.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And to your point about not wanting to delay, and I understand, I completely understand that impatience. That's fair. I guess maybe I would propose then, so it seems like there's nothing stopping us from moving forward with the Westlake property. So if this process wants to be applied for just that one single development, then okay, then fine. But I guess I'm not, excuse me, what I'm most uncomfortable with in the process that's here is the vacation part, because if we are allowing, because vacating encroachments offers the property owner the first advantage, right? Okay, the first advantage of owning their encroachment in the right of way, whether it was legally or illegally built. And if they have, if they have an allowance from pre-incorporation, fine, that perhaps makes it easier. But in preserving public, I just think that in preserving public access, because of the demographics that we just looked at and we just talked about in our existing parks plan, but beyond the parks plan, I mean, the accessibility of the lakes in general prior to incorporation in general have always been locked off, right? I mean, they've always been fairly inaccessible. I would ask this. So American Lake and Stillicum Lake have public access points for emergency use and access, aircraft or watercraft to patrol or serve the lake. But Gravelly Lake, Lake Louise, how, if at all, does emergency air or watercraft, what points of access do they have publicly to access to get onto the lake if need be? They're just accessing from the street, right?
I do not have that answer. I'm going to back up one step. I understand what I think you're pointing and you're looking at. I want to just be clear. I'm speaking to a framework to look at the whole totality of it. It is for study session and for input from the council as to what they would like to see and how they would like to move forward. I am not locked on anything that we are talking about, but what I will need is direction from council as to how they would like us to proceed to try and craft this if there is a change from what we're looking at. And that's kind of the reality of where I'm at. I can't even tell you, because we've not surveyed all 13 of the street ends, to say what encroachments do exist. I know of two that might classify as significant in what we're looking at. One has history prior to incorporation as to what we're looking at. So while I understand 100% what you're looking at, I don't have any factual basis to really speak to anything that you're asking me.
Yeah, I understand. And my only point was that that's the level of public access that is important to preserve and acknowledge and live with. If, you know, that's why public access is important in all these cases, because for those purposes of even just emergency management access that could exist, that perhaps don't exist now because a 2023 study says that there's impertinences along the way. And so secondarily, the biggest sore point for me is I think that street vacations just alone in and of themselves, like I mentioned earlier, can appear to be a gift of public funds, even though there is language in the outline that says, I think it's not for property use. But I don't think that that's strong enough. I think that that's why I'm asking for and proposing to look at a different path that considers permitting encroachments to be there and revocability of those instead of vacationing. And the other reason, it's not to complicate things. In fact, it's actually how all the jurisdictions surrounding prominent, luxurious areas like Lake Chelan, Lake Washington, Lake Sammamish, Lake Stevens, that's how they deal with encroachments. So I'm not proposing this to make things harder or difficult. I'm suggesting that path because I think that's kind of the path that we should be taking, as opposed to just awarding these encroached areas carte blanche.
Okay, so, Councilmember Pearson.
Just a brief comment. So, thank you, Mr. Mayor. My understanding of this is the framework. If someone did come back for a vacation request, that comes back through us for review, just like any other right-of-way vacation, and they have to go through the whole process so they get it all evaluated and all that. So I'm not really too concerned about the minutia on that part of it. Like, it still has to come back to us for a vacation request that we would have to ultimately approve or not approve as a council. So I don't, we're not setting precedent. We're not telling the city staff that they're going to be giving away right away or whatever, and they don't give away. I actually, right away vacation is very common in every jurisdiction. It's not a gift of anything. They have to pay for the property. So anyway, I don't think it's any part of a gift, but I'm totally fine with this framework and would be happy to move forward as is. So thank you.
Yeah, any other comments? I am too, because I think we've waited long enough. I, however, am intrigued by Councilmember Talbot's suggestions. So I think it should take a separate track, because how many months would it take you to put something together? You have to go find legislation that other cities have done. And we'd run it through the planning commission.
It would take a couple weeks for us to pull that legislation together. We could definitely, if we have the direction that we're told to go look at, we can go look at as to exactly what they're doing and how they're handling those. At the same time, we can have the conversation about, that's one portion of what we're looking at. So the one thing I want to be clear on, when it comes to a street end abutting water, the RCW has strict guidelines as to what we do and when we can release it. So it isn't a free for all of the council decides they're releasing it. It has to meet those guidelines of the RCW to be able to move forward. Planning and Public Works does take on that burden of looking at that review when it comes in. What are we doing? Can we still provide access? How are we moving forward? And then that's presented to council. It is 100% council's decision on whether they wish to take action or not. Council could draw the line in the sand if they wish and say, we're never releasing any right away. Or they could say, there's no benefit, we don't view there as being a benefit to where we're at based on it's on the moon, and we're going to release that to the neighboring parcel. The reality of when we look at it is there are guidelines that already exist in RCW specifically for street ends that abut the water.
Okay, are we voting on this next week?
We would
I don't-
follow council guidance. If enough are comfortable with putting this
Oh,
to a
the
vote,
Guidance.
we certainly can.
Well, they have the resolution in there, though.
Just, it's a draft resolution. The whole thing is a draft framework
Okay.
to try and facilitate the process.
Okay.
If council's comfortable with it, we can put it on the agenda for action and different things can be.
Well,
If you'd like to delay it,
I think we're gonna have more discussion on Saturday, but I would like to bifurcate. I'm worried we put too many, too much stuff on this bike, it'll crash. So, I'd like to personally, I'd like to go forward with the framework that we have. I think you need to work with Councilmember Talbot on that and do the research on that, and we need to understand that. But I don't want that to hold up the legislation. We got to get going on this stuff.
so it'd be a very short time frame to come back with legislation by the time we put packets together and provide that for the next Monday. If you want that information, I'd recommend.
Well, we're not gonna do it next Monday. We already have to talk about next. Monday.
Okay, okay, that's
Next
what I
Monday.
thought I was hearing, is that you want to move forward with this on
But on the
Monday.
time frame that staff was thinking about.
Okay,
Which
okay.
I assume is next month, right?
So I believe it was set for, I honestly would have to look at the schedule. I know it was set for us to move forward. If there's a decision that we want us to look at something, staff has no issues with that, but we will need more time than a week to go ahead and do that. So we'll need a couple weeks to look at it if we're looking at an alternative besides for what they are. Variance, vacation.
Two
easements.
separate issues.
So the problem that we run into is the one we're looking at. We could change the language in what we have in front of us, but right now it does speak to having to move towards how do we resolve it? This involves a framework on how to resolve that. If we don't have the off-ramp, then we don't really have an ability to move this forward. We need to have an idea on what that off-ramp is. We could look at resolving the language to be more open to where the council wants to move in the future, but that's the difficult part. It's right in the middle of what we're looking at.
Councilmember Ranstetter.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I am open to giving guidance to the staff to begin to use the framework that they've presented to gather information on specific street ends. That I think that action by the council will precipitate street end by street end based on the information that is developed. So I don't think we need to codify what is really an internal process within Planning and Public Works to gather the information, because eventually that's information we will need when it comes to a particular street end or a particular set of encroachments to make a decision about. But I don't think we have to put into the Lakewood Municipal Code this process. I think that's an internal process that our guidance is that we can tell Planning and Public Works to go ahead and begin to use it to gather the information that then we will use. And as we get to needing to make decisions about specific street ends, then we'll have it.
Thank you, Councilmember Ranstetter. Councilmember Lauricella.
Thank you, Mr. Boki. It's not clear to me why this is specifically required for us to move forward with the Westlake Street End. I would think we could move forward with that independent of this and make our own decisions. And I would agree with Mr. Brandstetter that I think each of these street ends is going to be unique, and we're going to take them one at a time to figure out what the right path is. Hopefully, it doesn't take 3 years for each one and take us 40 years to get through them all. I would like to see some acceleration as we move forward, but that's all I've got. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm with Councilmember Branstetter, I guess. Because now I'm really thoroughly confused. So are we moving a piece of, are you proposing a piece of legislation? Because there's a resolution in there, or are we not?
The resolution was to go ahead and clarify the framework with which we would move forward so that the public had that access and the ability to look at that. And the staff would have that on how we move forward.
Okay.
So it was clear and delineated for both public and internal staff.
Okay. Do you want our vote on that in sometime in the future?
The idea is we'd have a council adopted resolution that sets the consistent application of how we're going to go forward with encroachments in the street ends. We have 3 surveys within the packet there were 4 streets identified. Westlake is kind of separate from that because we're under design for that full thing. There's one small encroachment that we're designing, assuming it's going to be removed. It's actually a shoreline component. And so you can take Westlake, I think, pretty much out of this discussion. It's so the others that you have the surveys, we've shown them, I think they're in the packet, that identify where those encroachments are. This framework would allow us to identify what's going to happen with those different encroachments based on the level that they hit in terms of this criteria. Having a resolution pretty much provides that consistent application. So every time we have a street end, we are following that same application versus coming back to council with every street end as an individual basis, but to have a process that can apply for these other 3 outside of Westlake. And let's say then we do another group of 4, you have the same systematic, consistent process of how encroachments are going to be done. So if you have someone from the public or one of the adjacent owners that has an encroachment, we can go to them with a reasonable understanding of this is likely what's going to occur with that encroachment. Whether or not it's a vacation, a permitting, something else, ripping it out, that's what we're looking for. So it doesn't, each street end doesn't come back and create confusion and a repeat of the same discussion, but to have a consistent process to apply to each street end. And to have that passed by a resolution pretty much solidifies it versus having something that can be modified internally.
I'm sensing that we're ready to vote on that resolution. But I think you should schedule it for next month. And if there's other discussions surrounding it, then we'll either have to amend it or we'll have to come up with this another.
So not next week, but
No,
later on next month.
No, we're already going to have a discussion about next week. Next week's a train wreck.
And would we like to have, there was a lot of discussion about having an alternative process of permitting versus vacation. I'm assuming we would like that information.
I think Councilmember Talbot has asked for it and
Yeah.
Councilmember Laura Sella, but it sounds like, and we don't count votes, but the most of the rest of the group wants to go ahead.
Sure.
Thank you.
Now, would you like that at a regular action item with the alternative of a permitting or back at a study session?
I think we need to, I'm going to need a lot more information on permitting.
Okay.
I mean, if other cities are doing it, clearly it's something that can be done, but we're going to have to have a lot more discussion surrounding that.
So we'll plan on bringing that back at a study session.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Remag.
Been fun.
Okay, reports by the city manager. So I'm gonna say right now, because this is where we would usually go through the agenda. The city manager and I are gonna have to talk about the agenda. It's just way too extensive for what we can do in an evening, I think. Even starting at 6, I don't know that because I'm looking at stuff on the consent agenda that members might want pulled. And then we also have public comment that night on anything. Do we have any proclamations, awards, presentations next week? Okay, none at this time. That's great. And then some of the other ones might go pretty quickly, but review of automated traffic cameras, that's probably a pretty long discussion, I would say. Especially if it's almost ready for action, and Councilmember Laura Sella knows more about that. So I think there's some items that we are going to have to shrink off this agenda just for purposes of I think timeliness and making sure that we can get a good hearing on these, because that's the last item and it's a very important item. So we'll city manager, we can discuss it.
Yep, we can move things out and take the least timely and push them out to lessen down the agenda, not a problem.
Thank you. Reports by the city manager, Mr. Russell.
Just briefly, some of the events coming up, neighbor associations, we have Telecom Woodbrook tomorrow, U Summit on the 18th, the Whispers of Korean Artist Reception next Monday on the 20th, Fort Silicon Neighborhood Association on the 21st, the Downtown Association on the 22nd. Obviously, the retreat on the 18th. So I have that planned for all day. The only other thing I'll bring up is attended the Unified Regional Approach to Homelessness.
What time we
I
start?
believe it's 8 o'clock.
Is it here in Chambers? Mayor won't be here at 8. 8 o'clock here in Chambers? $8:30?
Okay.
Apparently.
The calendar says that if we've got the if the actual agenda itself says 8:30, we can find out real quick. Okay. There you go. So the meeting on the unified approach to homelessness met with representatives from some of the other cities in the county, kind of discussed where they're at with the draft resolution, concepts related to it. My take going away is that they're going to try and refine based on the feedback from the other municipalities about, what's the value proposition? What is it really looking for? How does that intertwine with what some cities are already doing, and why would they pay to, replicate some of those services, what the actual vision is of that entity. So I anticipate more to come, but I don't think it's going to be in the immediate future. And that's all.
How'd the other city managers take it?
A lot of the same discussion point. I mean, that was kind of the consensus was, okay, what is it that this entity would provide, and what is that value going to be? Discussion on want to try and maintain autonomy within different jurisdictions that may have different perspectives on addressing various issues related to homelessness. So that's why I think it had some questions that they want to go back and evaluate.
Is that it? Oh, wow. Okay. Councilmember Talbot. Let's start with councilmember comments, and then Councilmember Branstetter can let us know a little bit about URA too, if you want. Were you at the meeting too? Never mind. Councilmember Talbot.
Let's see, meetings this week, just keeping things, my comments short tonight. It is my intent to attend the Telecom Woodbrook Association meeting tomorrow night. And we thank you, Madam Clerk, for scheduling our H-Barn debrief. So I will see you, Mike and Ryan, for that. And next week is, I will also be at Fort Silicon. And as well as I would like to try to do both the Kiwanis Park cleanup and Wards Lake, but I think it will be more like Wards Lake and then skip over to Kiwanis Park. And then if I really feel ambitious, I will also try to attend Rep. Levitt's afternoon weekend chat. So those are that is my agenda for the next 2 weeks.
Thank you, Councilmember Talbot. Councilmember Laura Sella.
Thank you, Mayor Boki. Just a couple comments. Looking forward to the retreat on Saturday. Should have some good discussions. The agenda looked very full for the day that we have. So I'm curious if we'll take the same approach as last time with everybody writing down their stuff, putting it on the walls and voting. So I'm looking forward to that. Thanks to the folks who presented tonight. Couple of actions or requests for the city manager. Can we get a timeline for that Western State Hospital escapement, starting with when Lakewood Police Department was notified, and then from that point forward, so we know when our community was informed?
Yeah, I can get you when we were notified. I do not believe a press release ever went out for our community, so it would have been media. That's why we've met and are moving forward with protocol that when we do have that will be a release.
Gotcha. So no information came out from the city about the topic at all?
Other than several members of the department were interviewed by the media, but no press release.
Okay, thank you. A question about tree fund dollars, and this may be a little off the wall, but can those potentially be used for alternative options for transportation projects to save trees? Like, for instance, in front of Dower Elementary, if we had more funds to spend, could we route the sidewalk around the trees? Is that an acceptable use of tree fund dollars?
Those are all within ordinance. I'd have to take a look and see what those are at.
Okay, thank you. And then two more things. First, if we're finding we're overbooked for meetings going forward, maybe it's time to reconsider having an occasional fourth meeting a month or going back to a regular 4 meetings a month schedule. Because if we've got stuff on our agenda that we're not getting to, we have to find ways to do that. And then my last question, and it's probably a no because I think people are really passionate about it, but should we consider some sort of a subcommittee on the Lakefront Street End stuff that we were getting buried in? Can we delegate to a group of 3 of us so that we don't have a quorum? All right, I agree with Councilmember Brandstetter about deferring and discussing on Saturday. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Brandstetter, for that suggestion. Councilmember Brandstetter.
Yeah, I will be, the South Sound 911 Board is meeting on Wednesday, and it is at that meeting that I expect them to dissolve their $9 million radio fund back to all the police and fire agencies. And so I'm expecting that the action on that day will be that Lakewood will receive this, again, $626,000 is our share of that 9 million, based on our that we pay 7% of the communications assessment across the county to be able to go and do that. I was glad to see today that the art from the Korean Artists Association is up in the is up in the hallway, and the reception for the artists is a week from today, and we should look to go to that. But I would also suggest that we get our communications folks to somehow document both that event as well as the art itself in some manner that it is appropriate for you to take to show or present to Gimhe as you go and see them at the end of the month. I know we did that similarly, but a book or a montage or something of what is there, and, to just share with our sister city to be able to go and do that. I am looking forward to Saturday. I think that there are, we have to get ourselves down to a reasonable number of goals, where far more than we're imagining to be able to go and do that. And I hope that we'll be able to do that. And I was glad to read the email that our student who we nominated for a Quality Community Scholarship from AWC is in fact going to receive one of those $3,000 scholarships.
So thank you, Councilmember Branstetter, to answer. I need to respond to your email, but I can make the presentation because I'm planning to go. So, but thank you very much.
Done it 5 times.
You
Ah.
also-
So
you have to
glad.
you have to carry the
I'm
flag, too.
glad that you will.
We'll
Okay.
make him carry the flag too.
Even with my
You have
bad
to
arm and all. Okay. Councilmember Pearson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was going to ask if someone wanted to swap me with the Tillicum Neighborhood Association, but I see Councilmember Talbot will bail me out on that. I have coaching baseball tomorrow night. So we had a wonderful kickoff to the season down at Fort Silicon Park last weekend, and all of the games were played down at the fields, and the commissioner of the Lakewood Baseball Club made it very apparent that we need to be respectful of the fields down there, that there's no chewing of sunflower seeds and gum and stuff, otherwise we'll get kicked off the fields. So yeah, wrangling a bunch of little kids that, all they want to do is chew seeds and gum and stuff. So and we got a run the bases. The kids got to run the bases with the Pierce College Raiders team. So it was a wonderful opening baseball day for the kids. And that's all I have today.
Thank you, Councilmember Pearson. Councilmember Lindholm.
Thank you, Mayor Boki. There's a lot going on right now. I won't recite it here, but just really looking forward to our retreat. And I support Councilmember Branstetter's idea of, trying to limit our goals as long as they're mine. Thanks.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Bell.
Thank you, Mayor. I will also pile on to the retreat. We'll see what's going to happen there. It sounds like it's going to be very exciting, full of a lot of ideas. So I hope that we're able to all come awake at 8 o'clock and focused so we can really figure out what our priorities are as a council. So I think that will be a really great time. I will miss the Wards Lake Park grand opening. I have a funeral I have to attend, so that's probably one of the only reasons why I wouldn't go to that. I went over and drove and checked it out, walked around with my daughter. We checked out the Portland Loo, all the stuff that was there, walked around. So it's really beautiful park. So I think I'm looking forward to enjoying that a little bit more. And then on last Friday, I went out on a ride along with our wonderful police department. I was out with Wyatt. I don't remember his last name. And Jeremy was the sergeant, I believe. I'm not the best with titles. So, and then there was about 4 other guys on there, and they were just so informative, so friendly, shared great stories about their interaction with the community. I just had a really great time. I got to see also a canine demonstration of them looking for people within the building. It was 2 other agencies were at LPD, so that was really cool to see that training. So it's just really great thing, and I encourage my fellow council members to get out there and to do this ride along. I'm going to try to be doing it a lot more often. I really think it keeps us connected with not only what's happening for public safety, but with our officers who are out there with our community so much. So I just wanted to say thank you to all of them. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Bell. Also, I will be at Tillicum Woodbrook. They invited me to speak as mayor, so I'll try to create a grander vision. I have no idea what I'm going to talk about yet, but I'll try to create a grand vision. So if Councilmember Talbot speaks as a council member, she can get more into the nitty gritty details, and I'll try to. I don't know how that's going to work, but we'll work with it, right? Maybe we need to work something out before. Anyway, they asked me to come even though other members were on there, and I said yes. Wednesday, I'm going to go to something interesting. It's a CTE Career and Technical Education thing at Harrison Prep. Asked to attend. Senator Nobles will be there also, so I'll get a chance to talk to her, and I can thank her for the work that she did for us. Looking forward to the retreat. I'm going to leave it. I thought I had one more thing to say. Oh, I threw out the first pitch at the game, but the game was delayed for Pierce College. It was, let's say, nothing to write home about. So, yeah, my pop gun of an arm is even worse with old age. So, they made sure that they were very nice to me. But anyway, the highlight was that the catcher is a young man from my hometown, and he went to the exact same middle school and the exact same high school. So I was incredibly proud to be there. So it made my day. Anyway, it's easy to make my day. Anyway, thank you very much for your good work. We are going to work on that agenda for next week, so we don't, so we can give sufficient time to some of the more weighty matters that we're going to have in front of us. Anyway, thank you very much. And is that it?